Shalom.
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 It'd be a whole lot easier on me to keep him laughing if he wouldn't grin.
Shalom from Centerville.
Shalom down there, Mr.
Shalom.
How are y'all?
It's fine.
That's good. Okay. We got everything on one more time. You know, these festivals are hard on folks. You know that? Just trying to keep up with what you're supposed to do, you know? All right. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kadishanu b'mitzvotah v'tzivanu l'shmoah kol shofar. Blessed are you, Yahweh Eloheinu, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us to hear and respond to the call of the shofar. Shmini Atzeret. Shmini Atzeret. A lot of different ways of saying it. Everybody understands that today is the 8th day, correct? Let me ask you this question. When did tabernacles end?
Yesterday. Last night.
Yesterday at sundown. Tabernacles is a feast of 7 days. Shmini Atzeret. Go over to Leviticus 23, just a second here. It's so funny. We do these things for years, then all of a sudden you find the scripture that says something, you realize you've been doing it wrong, so you have to change. Right?
Maybe you found something else.
Well, I'm sure I'm not the only one who thought Tabernacles was 8 days and today was the last day of Tabernacle. Huh?
Okay.
You thought that. Well, anyway, I mean, so we find out that it's not, right? But in Leviticus chapter 23, in verse 34, it says, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days. So the Feast of Tabernacles runs for what? 7 days. Verse 35 says, "On the first day will be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it." Verse 36, "For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh." But then he says, "On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh." It is now our English Bibles have the word sacred assembly. Now this is talking about the 8th day being the sacred assembly. That word there, sacred assembly, in verse 36 is the word Atzeret, or ATS-EH- RET, or RETH, depending on whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi. Okay?
You have a number for that?
The number for that word is the number 6116. Atzeret, or Atzeret. And the word 8 up there, on the 8th day, there in verse 36, is the number 8066. Now, the normal Hebrew word for the word 8 is the word Shmoneh, which is the number 8083. But in this passage, it's the number 8066, Shmini, not Shmoneh, but Shmini.
801?
8066. Now, 8083 is the word Shmoneh, that just means the number 8, or the ordinal number. So why did he use this word Shmini, 8066, and it means 8 as a surplus above 7. There's a little bit of difference in there, okay? So as a surplus or something else over and above the 7. Now, and I'm just saying, think about this, okay? I'm not trying to say that this is the only way that you can interpret this, but one of the things he's telling us, I believe we've shown that he's given us a 7,000-year plan, okay? But what happens at the end of 7,000 years? We don't know for sure. We kind of know, in the end of the 1,000 year, the New Jerusalem comes down and all these kind of things, and some things that happen as we enter into the next millennium after the 7, okay? But we really don't know exactly for sure exactly what's going to come, but we know it's going to be something great, okay? The new city of Jerusalem comes down at the end of the 7,000th year, and then we enter into this 8th day over and above the 7, which is, kind of like something special. The word Atzeret, which is the word translated as solemn assembly, I don't know why it says solemn assembly. The word itself comes from 61:13. It means an assembly, but it means an assembly not just, but an assembly especially on a festival or holy day. So what festival or what holy day is this that this assembly is occurring on? It's not on one of the 7 days of tabernacles. It's just the 8th day is all we really know from Scripture, okay? So I set this, before you for your consideration, okay? Let's just for a moment think that Messiah had come back on Yom Teruah. Okay, and we came with him, right? Or we went with him. And then on Yom Kippur, he came back, and his feet touched down the Mount of Olives, and we all came back with him, okay? And that was on Yom Kippur. Now that was what? 5 days prior to the beginning of the Tabernacles. Right now that would have been like 13 days ago, something like that. 5 days we were with him, and he was in the process, and all the wicked people in the world out there have now been destroyed. Okay? And only those who are walking in obedience to his word and have made it through the tribulation, thus who are still alive, and the bride that came with him are around right now. And we just celebrated our wedding supper. We know that he's been crowned as king now, and we were married to him, and we became the bride now, and the king and queen are going to rule eventually, and we went through the supper, and that was all the wedding festivities and everything was all finished up and over last night sundown. But he told us in the Torah, you're going to have another assembly on this 8th day. So here we are assembled, not knowing exactly what's happened, but we know that he is our king, right? We're the queen. And now today, he's going to tell us what we're going to be doing during this next 1,000 years from this point. Because it's a time of restoration, restoring everything back like it was in the beginning. Okay? And now it's kind of like we find out what our duties are. Now, I'm just suggesting this to think about. I'm not trying to say that Scripture bears this out, okay? But I can't find anything else in Scripture that gives us anything else other than what this day is about. But we know that it takes place right at the end of the wedding supper and everything, which takes place in the first few years of this 1,000-year millennium, right? Which is the 7th millennium. And we know that in the book of Acts it says that Messiah is at the right hand of the Father until the time of restoration of all things, even every word which proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh. So he's back now, and we're at the beginning, and we're trying to restore everything back like it was in the beginning. So we have a time of restoration. Now, a lot of times when you start trying to put things back like it were, people have problems. All of a sudden, we're not going to be celebrating 4th of July anymore. We're going to be celebrating Tabernacle. I mean, things change, okay? We don't do the things we did. We're going to be doing something new. And for a lot of us, a lot of what we're doing, we're just learning for the first time. I mean, I don't think there's anybody here that knows it all yet, is there? Anyway. So, this root word, this assembly, especially a festival or holiday, this Atzeret, okay, also means to enclose. That is, to surround. It means to separate from common ground by a fence. Okay. It also means to include. It means to encompass, and it means to cover. So this 8th day has all these meanings in this thing, and I'm not sure that we all can apply all these understandings yet, but I'm just trying to give you what the Word actually says, and then hopefully as we study through, we'll begin to learn more and more. And it looks like we have another year to go, and we're going to be starting in Genesis here, again. And maybe when we begin to keep these ideas in mind, and as we learn things, we apply them in our life, we'll begin to get a greater and deeper understanding this next year as we go through Torah. I think every year we understand it more than we did the year before. You read the same things. But anyhow, the name of the reading for today, okay, is really called, and this is the blessing.
this is the water.
And this is the blessing. Okay? And if you go to Deuteronomy 33, and we'll get the name of the reading from the first verse in Deuteronomy chapter 33. Now, most of our Bibles have the word now in there, but in the Hebrew it's the word and. And this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of Elohim, blessed the children of Israel before his death. When Moses led the children right up to the edge of the promised land to begin with, they should have gone into the promised land, but they didn't go. It was 40 years before they went. Okay? And at the same time, you know, even in the book of Hebrews, it says if they had ever really come into the promised land, right? It says in the book of Hebrews, he wouldn't have ever said, well, there's another keeping of the seventh day Sabbath. If it had already been fulfilled, he wouldn't have said that. So all of us are still looking for that ultimate entering into the seventh day Sabbath. And the scriptures also teach that none of those who went before are going to enter into that seventh day Sabbath without us. So we're all going to go into it together at the same time, whenever that appointed time is. Today, of course, we know we're still in the season of our rejoicing. That's what this is all about. I want to start with a little story from the Talmud. Okay? It's called A Tale from the Hasid. Remember the word Hasid? The Hasidic one, they're supposed to be the ones who are upright, the righteous, the ones walking in obedience. Okay? You know, just because a word means that it's applied to people doesn't mean they do it, right? But Rabbi Nachman of a country called Bratslav, which is somewhere in Russia or Poland, was invited by a humble man to visit his sukkah, on which he had spent more than he could afford. He had purchased the finest lumber, expensive decorations, and beautiful pines for the roof covering. Okay. So Rabbi Nachman accepted the invitation, and he paid a visit during the festival, and he was accompanied by a disciple or a student. When they entered the booth, the disciple whispered to Rabbi Nachman that the sukkah was not constructed according to all the law. But the rabbi remained silent. After they left the sukkah, Rabbi Nachman observed to his disciple, "This man went to so much trouble and spent so much money for the booth, and you raise questions as to its validity because of legal stringencies, which are man-made rules and precepts." Now, you hear what he's saying, okay? He's judging things based on rules and precepts which are made by man, not by Yahweh. We do the same thing to people. We judge sometimes based on our interpretation of what Torah says. We wind up establishing ideas in our mind because we think that's what it means, and and by golly, that's what it is, and therefore I'm judging you based on what I think it means. We do that. I mean, is everybody understanding, and you can see yourself at some point in time where we've done this?
Guilty.
Okay? So we judge their works, their actions by laws and rules that exist only in our interpretation of Torah. Okay? Not always, but sometimes. And we really need to, we talked about this before. Do I do what I do because the Word says do it, or do I do what I do because the tradition of men say do it? Okay? And there again, what am I trying to judge? Why am I trying to judge people anyway? What is the purpose in doing this, We do this sometimes without ever considering the object of that person's motivation in the first place. Now, I feel like I'm called to teach Torah. And I can teach Torah, and the Torah says we're supposed to observe the Sabbath. And I can teach Torah, and the Torah says we're supposed to observe the festival. I can teach Torah, and the Torah says we're not supposed to eat pork. I can teach Torah, and the Torah says we're not supposed to do this and that. And we really don't have any problem with the ins and outs where it's written in black and white. But when we get down to the one that says, love your neighbor as yourself, how do you teach that? Okay? How do you do those things? And he said that, nobody, if you love yourself, the Scripture talks about those things. We've all heard, from the time we started growing up, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself, right? During this season of our rejoicing, which is what this is all about. The Festival of Tabernacles, we always understand, is a wedding festival, right? The supper, we eat and rejoice and everything. The wedding's taking place, Messiah's come, he's been crowned as king, we're queen. Do we look at these festivals and celebrate them from that viewpoint, okay? Or do we look at something like that, well, we're outside, we're playing, it's just like it would be if it was the 4th of July. I'm not trying to get on people, what I'm trying to say is something, what frame of reference do we have to celebrate other than what we've been given over the years, right? And if that's the only frame of reference you have, how can you do anything differently? The only way you can do something differently is to change your frame of reference, to change what you're comparing it to, right? But until we know that we're supposed to do that, how do we do it? And where does it say that we're supposed to change our frame of reference? Doesn't he say that we're supposed to wash our mind by the washing of the water of the Word? And the more we study the Word, then the more our mind gets changed. Now, I think that we can all recognize that some people change faster than others, right? That doesn't mean they're not changing, okay? And that also means sometimes that, you're changing faster in some areas, but it may be that they're changing in other areas faster than you are. When we quit looking at everybody else and what they do or not do, and just concentrate on us and what we do, you realize how much easier everything gets? And then if we realize that everybody's looking at themselves, instead of us looking at them, we don't have to worry about them no more. Then all we got to concentrate on is one, not 100 or 50. If you're trying to control 50 people, you're in trouble, right? So during this season of our rejoicing, I'm saying let us develop ways that we can encourage others to seek to please Yahweh. Okay? Let me just give you a thought, and I'm not trying to pick on anything or anybody, but the Sabbath day. You've heard me say this before. People don't have to be here to observe the Sabbath day. We all understand that, right? But what happens if somebody, let's say, we're here or wherever you are on the Sabbath day, and you come at some point in time, and all of a sudden you'd like to go, but it ain't sundown yet. I got to sit here until it's sundown till time to go. In reality, in your mind, you already left anyway. What difference does it make whether you stay here 30, 40 minutes more or not? And the question I'm really trying to get to is, if Yahweh said you come together for holy convocation on the Sabbath day, and you do that for 2 or 3 hours, okay, and then somebody goes home or leaves, what law did they break? Did anything say you couldn't leave, after whatever? Did anything say, well, you got to be there till sundown? But we get these ideas in our heads sometimes, and that's the way it's got to be, and yet nowhere in Scripture does it say that. What I'm trying to say is everything that we do individually, we need to examine individually, okay? And then we need to look at what we're examining in ourselves and see if what we're examining is what we have been judging somebody else by. Does that make sense? And, you see what I'm saying? Because then when we turn around and we're only looking at us, okay, we really don't have time to worry about what somebody else is doing. As we go into that, I thank you for your listening. We need to think about, we need to be sober sometimes in some of those things we're doing and ask ourselves, are we really walking in the footsteps of the Messiah? What would he do? You know, we've all seen you put the little bracelets in on, and people say, what would Jesus do? You know, what would Messiah do? He would follow Torah. So somehow or other in the Torah we'll begin to find that we have to look for those things that match what we're doing. If we can't find the things that match what we're doing, then maybe we ought not be doing it.
Well, I said this morning when she was reading in Atzeret, the Word was in him, and he knew what to do because the Word was in him.
Yeah. Yeah. The problem with that is the Word, we have to put it in us, right? We haven't been raised with that Word, so what we're trying to do is put the Word in us. So let's all give everybody again a room to grow. That's what we have to do. Today, like I say, the reading is Shmini Atzeret. We're going to be reading Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 1 through 34, verse 12. That's pretty short. We are going to read Genesis 1:1 through Genesis 2, verse 3. I don't know who made the break there between chapter 1 and chapter 2, but the thought, the flow of thoughts doesn't end until chapter 2, verse 3, as far as the first chapter of Genesis. Now, next Shabbat, we will begin in Genesis in earnest, and we'll be reading Genesis chapter 1 through chapter 6. So we got, it's a pretty heavy study to do next Shabbat in Genesis. So today we're going to read Genesis 1:1, and again, this is in keeping with the 8th day, because if this is the time when the Messiah and the bride begins to rule, okay, then he's going to start over saying, okay, this is what says Genesis 1:1, and we're going to restore everything back the way it was at the beginning, right? If you're trying to go back to the beginning, that's what this whole thing is about. And of course, today then would be called what? Simchat Torah, rejoicing in the Torah. Okay? We've got a song by that name. We might play that this afternoon, by yeah, the fella on the fiddle, violin. Okay. But I want to go in 1 Kings chapter 8.
Where are we going?
1 Kings chapter 8. Starting verse 54. Now, this is going back. Solomon, had finished building the temple, and everything had been dedicated. And we know that after the completion of the temple was when the order of the priesthood began, and everything started at that time frame. Verse 54, and so it was, when Solomon had finished praying all this prayer and supplication to Yahweh, that he arose from before the altar of Yahweh, from kneeling on his knees with his hands spread up to heaven. Then he stood and blessed all the congregation of Israel with a loud voice, saying, Blessed be Yahweh, who has given rest, or peace, shalom, to his people Israel, according to all that he promised. There has not failed one word of all his good promise, which he promised through his servant Moses. May Yahweh, Eloheka, be with us, or Eloheinu, as he was with our fathers. May he not leave us nor forsake us, that he may incline our hearts to himself, to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments, and his statutes, and his judgment, which he commanded our fathers. And may these words of mine, with which I have made supplication before Yahweh, be near Yahweh, Eloheka, day and night, that he may maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel, as each day may require. That all the peoples of the earth may know that Yahweh is Elohim, there is no other. Let your heart therefore be loyal to Yahweh, Eloheinu, to walk in his statutes and keep his commandments as at this day. Then the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifices before Yahweh. And Solomon offered a sacrifice of peace offering, which he offered to Yahweh, 22,000 bulls and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the children of Israel dedicated the house of Yahweh. On the same day, the king consecrated the middle of the court that was in front of the house of Yahweh. For there he offered burnt offerings, grain offerings, and the fat of the peace offerings, because the copper altar that was before Yahweh was too small to receive the burnt offering. I mean, you're talking about, a slaughterhouse operation. I mean, a couple of 100,000 animals out there being sacrificed. Of course, you got all the people from all the land up there. Verse 65, at that time Solomon held a feast, and all Israel with him, a great congregation from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt before Yahweh Eloheka. 7 days and 7 more days. 14 days. Now they had started dedicating the temple 7 days earlier, and after the dedication, then they began to celebrate the 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. So 7 and 7 is 14. But now that 14 days is over, they're beginning something on the 8th day. If Messiah was here, he is our King of Peace, our King of Shalom, King of Peace. Okay, the King Solomon is a picture of the King of Peace. Melech being the king. Verse 66. On the 8th day, he sent the people away. Now he just says he sent the people away, but it's like he sent the people somewhere, right? And if this is going to pertain to us in the future, and our King of Peace is going to send to us somewhere, right? Each one, is going to have something special to do. On the 8th day, he sent the people away, and they blessed the king and went to their tents joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness that Yahweh had done for his servant David and for Israel, his people. Now, isn't it funny? This is Solomon was the king, and their blessing for what he had done for his servant David, or the beloved. Again, he's talking about the Messiah, okay? I think there's some more, prophetic. I see everything in here is pointing towards Messiah in some way. So even this, is referring to an 8-day period. So go back to Deuteronomy 33, excuse me. We read verse 1 a while ago. Now this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of Elohim, blessed the children of Israel before his death. Verse 2, and he said, Yahweh came from Sinai. From Sinai, depending on how pronounce it. Numbers 44:80. It's a mountain down in Arabia. So he's saying Yahweh came up from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. You see, Seir is where you go through. If you come up from Midian, you come up from that mountain, you come up through the mountain of Seir, coming on up, into where they are. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints. Now we actually know when they came out of Egypt, he told us how many there were, and we had 2 numberings, with them in the wilderness, so we actually know how many people they numbered and how many he called out. So this term here, 10,000s of saints, is a reference to a multitude, not necessarily a definitive number. See what I'm saying? It's a symbolic number. Let's put it that way. The word dawn, the number is 22:24. Guzara'ak, and it means to rise up. From Seir is 8165. It's referring to the land of Edom. He was in Midian. He came through Edom and came on up. From Mount Paran, and Paran, the number is 6290. It means the place of caverns. We know that there's caves and caverns all over that land down there. And most all of those caves and caverns have names on them that the Arab people have put on there. Some places they call it the Mount of Moses. And I forget what the Arabic terms are. Excuse me?
What was the number?
For what? 6290. Means a place of caverns. And then he says, from his right hand, a fiery law for them. That word law there is the number 1881. It's not the word Torah. It's the word dath, D-A-T-H, if you want to transliterate it. But this is talking about Yahweh leading the people out of Egypt and traveling in the wilderness and bringing them up, okay? Does everybody understand this? We have in Jude where he quotes, supposedly, from the book of Enoch, and it talks about Yahweh came with 10,000s of his saints. It's an indefinite number there. So he kind of references the same thing. So him bringing all the people back up, into the promised land, okay, is kind of the same thing as when in the middle of tribulation, when the people flee, and they're supposed to flee to Petra, which is in the land of Edom. And here he is talking about here, he came up through Edom and he brought the people back. He's going to come up through Edom again, pick up those who are hiding down there. And Edom means what? Red. Adamah, which is the word for Adam, but it's also the word for mankind, means what? Red man, because he's made from what? Red earth. And sometimes the earth becomes red with the shed blood that's in it. Okay? Adamah, Adamah is a field of blood. Remember when Judas, and he died and everything, called it the field of blood? Adamah is because of the redness of the blood. There's so many parallels here which picture, these things happening. Yes, he's talking about Yahweh, and he's leading people out of Egypt. He's traveling in the wilderness. He says there's a fiery law for them, And go to Exodus 31.
What was that number for law there again?
For law, 1881.
1881?
Exodus 31. See, there in Deuteronomy, he said he had a fiery law. Fiery law. Here in Exodus 31, look at verse 18. Verse 18 is Yahweh speaking to Moses. And when he had made an end of speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moshe 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written with the finger of Elohim. And he's a fiery, and we understand he said he's a consuming fire. He came down on the mountain in a consuming fire. Moses went up in a consuming fire. He gave him the tablets of stone in the consuming fire, written with his finger. Okay? You see the connection here between, when he said he came up with a fiery law for them. How Cecil B. DeMille got the idea, in the 10 Commandments of Moses up there with the stones, and then the fire finger coming out and writing on the tablets. I mean, it's pretty good special effects in the movie. But it's how you make the connection. Go to chapter 32 there and look at verse 16. It says, tablets of the work of El, and the writing was the writing of El engraved on the tablets. We're told that, 2 or 3 places here. Go back to Deuteronomy, we'll look at verse 3. Deuteronomy 33 and verse 3. You say, yes, he loves the people. All his saints are in your hand. They sit down at your feet, receiving your words. They sit down at your feet, receiving your words. I think that's a very interesting statement. Let's go to Luke chapter 10. In Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 38. So now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Miriam, who also sat at Yehoshua's feet and heard his word. So that's what he's talking about over there. They sit at your feet and hear your word. And then here we have this passage, we're talking about Messiah Yehoshua, and here's them sitting at his feet. Verse 40, but Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, now this word Lord here is probably Yehoshua, because they knew what his name was. Do you not care, or she may have called him Rabboni, or Rabbi. Do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me. And Yehoshua answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you're worried and troubled about many things. Well, he could be saying that to all of us today. You're worried about an awful lot of things. You got a lot of things you're messing with, okay? But one thing is needed. And Miriam has chosen that good part, which shall not or will not be taken away from her. she chose to sit at his feet and hear his word. And he said, that will not be taken. But isn't that kind of what he's saying over here? He loves the people. All his saints are in your hand. They sit down at your feet receiving your words. Verse 4, Moshe commanded a Torah for us. Now that word law there is the word Torah, 84:51. Moses commanded a Torah for us. This Bible says a heritage of the congregation of Yaakov. That word heritage, Numbers 41:81.
4181?
41:81. And the word instead of here, it is an inheritance like, but the word itself actually means a possession. So Moses commanded a Torah for us, a possession of the congregation of Yaakov. It belongs to the congregation of Yaakov. Somebody says, who does the law belong to? The congregation of Yaakov. That's what Scripture says, right? That's the covenant that He's given us. It belongs to them. If somebody wants to partake of the covenant, what do you got to do? Join with the ones to whom it belongs. That's pretty simple, isn't it? But you know, if people don't read this, they're not going to see anything like that. The inheritance of the congregation of Yaakov. Verse 5. And he was king in Yeshurun when the leaders of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. That word, Yeshurun, the number is 3484. The word itself means the upright ones, or the righteous ones. This Yeshurun, 3484, comes from the word Yashar, which is the number 3474. And it means to be straight. He was king in Yeshurun when the leaders of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. You'll notice he was king of the upright ones. Okay? For someone to say that Yehoshua is Yahweh, or Yahweh is Yehoshua, okay? To say he's king and then deny his word or deny his Torah, okay, is the same thing as denying Yehoshua himself. A king without authority is not a king. If he has no authority over your life, then he's not your king. Does that make sense? The only way he can be king over your life is for you to order it according to his word. Right? If some part of your life you set aside and say, oh, well, you can have all of my life, but this part, this is not yours. Then the question is he king over all of your life? And the answer is no. And if he's not, then you can say there was no king in Israel. Okay? And as long as there was a king in Israel, they followed his rule. But when they kicked him out, they wanted another king like the nations had. They wanted to be like the nations of the world. Okay? The same thing happens today. If we don't want him king in our life, if there's some part of our life we don't want him to rule over, then we want somebody else or something else to be king over our life. And if you've given somebody else that part, then where is he in reality? He's not king in your life. Verse 6. Now, before we started here in verse 6, go back. Verse 1 said, this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of Elohim, blessed the children of Israel before his death. So now we're going to start in verse 6. And we started with the tribe of Reuben. And this is the blessing that he's put on let's say that the tribe, because by this time Reuben himself was dead, you know, it was just the tribe of Reuben that was still alive, okay? And verse 6, if you'll notice the word, you know, this English Bible said, let Reuben live and not die, nor let his men be few. The word nor in this translation is not in the text. So if you read it the way it's actually written in the Hebrew, it says, let Reuben live, not die, let his men be few. He said he ain't going to have many. Actually, literally Hebrew, he said, let his men be numbered, or means small enough to count. Okay? The word few there is the number 4557. The number is mispar in Hebrew. Now the word by itself means very few. When the word is used as an adverb describing something else, it means innumerable. So evidently when the translator, you know, read it, they thought, well, it meant nor let his men be few, meaning that there was going to be a whole bunch of them. But we just said, used by itself, it means few. And in the Hebrew text, it is alone. Okay. So if it's not describing something else and by itself it means very few, what does that mean? It means let them be few. Now if you remember, Reuben's land was over the river, you know, in what we call Transjordan today, right? How many of the Jewish people of the tribe of Reuben are in that land today? Probably not any. Very few, right? Yeah, if any. So actually the land was taken by the Moabites going back at that time, and then whoever owns it today. Now notice, you know, this is, as he's blessing the children, in a way he's saying what these things he's saying is what's going to come on the tribes, these people today in these latter days. Remember, you know, Jacob and everything said, I'm going to tell you what's going to befall my people in the latter days. That's where we are. If we begin to look at the time frame that we're involved in today and the way prophecy is coming to pass, and I think everybody can understand that prophecy is happening very, very fast today. You know, we can just but understand it. Verse 7, and this he said of Judah. He said, hear Yahweh, not hear, but hear Shema, Yahweh, the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, and may you be a help against his enemies.
Amen.
Has not Yahweh helped the children of Judah to this day?
Yeah.
I mean, we all recognize that they sit over there in the land of Israel right now, you know, calling themselves Jews, Judah, which is whether, you know, whether they are or whether they're not. But it's not by their own might, it's because Yahweh helped them. I mean, when you roll a bunch of barrels down a highway with chains in it, make it sound like tanks coming down the road, and the 640 armed men or 2 or 3 divisions of Syrian army run like everything from a bunch of barrels, who done it? Isn't that Yahweh fighting for his people? I mean, if you go back and look at the battles and the wars that Israel's fought, you know, and how they've come out on top, in the years when it happened, they were always attacked on some of the festival days. Verse 8. Well, go to Judges chapter 1 before we leave this one. In the book of Judges, so now after the death of Yehoshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked Yahweh, saying, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And Yahweh said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. So he's chosen Judah, okay? Now Simeon went with Judah. Judah led the fight for his brother Simeon. And all of the land of Simeon was inside the nation of Judah. Now Simeon kind of went away. We just absorbed into Judah till you can't tell the difference anymore. And as we go through this whole thing, you'll find that nowhere was Simeon blessed by Moses. Okay? But if you go back into chapter 49 and 50 in Genesis, you'll find in the blessing of Yaakov, he said that Simeon and Levi be separated totally. Simeon never did anything to redeem himself, but Levi did. Remember in the book of Numbers. Verse 8, and of Levi he said, your Tumim and your Urim be with your Holy One. We've got these words, let your Tumim and your Urim be with your Holy One, but let, be, and with are not in the text. They've been, I guess somebody say, well, it's implied, but actually he's saying your Tumim and your Urim, your Holy One. The Urim and the Tumim were the two stones that were held in the breast pocket. Remember? And these were what were consulted whenever they wanted an answer. Lights and perfection, right? He says this was your Holy One, whom you tested at Massah. Who'd they test? Yahweh Yehoshua, one that was leading them, in the wilderness, Whom you tested at Massah, and with whom you contended at the waters of Meribah. Now, Tumim, the number is 8550, and it means perfection. Urim is the number 224, and it means light. The actual Hebrew is like the Tumim and the Urim be one with or equal to the Holy One of Yahweh. It's a better rendering of this passage. Now there's a blessing on Levi and a curse on those who hate or rise against Levi. So he's saying the Urim and the Tumim are going to be with, like with the Holy One whom you tested. And then verse 9 he says, who says of his father and mother, I have not seen them, nor did he acknowledge his brothers or know his own children, for they have observed your word and kept your covenant. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai after receiving the Torah, and all the people were down there worshiping the golden calf, and Moses threw down the tablets and broke the stone tablets, and everything kind of broke loose, and then all of a sudden he told all of those that are on Yahweh's side to me. And there was a tribe of Levi that came over. And then he said, gird on your sword and go through and kill all those others. And the tribe of Levi went through and killed 3,000 of their brothers, right? Mm-hmm. This is said, who said of his father and mother, I have not seen them, nor did he acknowledge his brothers or know his own children, for they have observed your word and kept your covenant. Levi was the one that went through and destroyed the ones who broke. I think it's interesting that 3,000 were killed at that time, and then when the Torah, or the Spirit came on the day of Pentecost, it says 3,000 were added to the ecclesia that day. Kind of like 3,000 went away, but 3,000 came back. I think that's kind of interesting. Okay. Verse 10. They shall teach Yaakov your judgments, and Israel your Torah. They shall put incense before you, and a whole burnt sacrifice on your altar. Notice he's saying that Levi is the one that's going to teach the judgments and the Torah of Yahweh. Verse 11, bless his substance, Yahweh, and accept the work of his hands. Strike the loins of those who rise against him, and of those who hate him, that they rise not again. You realize how great a blessing this is he's putting on the tribe of descendants of Levi? I mean, nobody can come against him. The only way that they can have any kind of problems is when they refuse to be obedient to his word, and then they sin, and then they bring the cursing upon themselves because of their own sin. But nobody else can do it. Verse 12 of Benjamin, he said, the beloved of Yahweh shall dwell in safety by him, He shelters him all the day long, and he shall dwell between his shoulders. Benjamin, stop and think about it. Jacob and all his children, you know, when all the children of Leah and Rachel, they were all born where? In Chaldea. The only son of Jacob that was actually born in the land was Benjamin. Anybody ever think about that? He's the only one born in the land. The Temple Mount, which contains the temple and the courtyard around it, the actual boundary, now this is the way I understand it, the actual boundary between the land that was allotted to Benjamin and the land that was allotted to Judah, the boundary line runs right in front of the temple, so the temple's in Benjamin and the courtyards are in Judah. Okay. Now, the one that's sheltering him is what? Yehoshua, right? Or Yahweh, right? So if he dwelt in the temple, he dwelt between his shoulders, just like between Benjamin and Judah is where Yahweh dwelt in the temple. Right on his shoulders, yeah. Now, I'm not sure exactly, Nina probably knows, because the city of Shechem, you know, Shechem or Nablus or one of those cities is means shoulders, is in that area right there where all the fighting, I think, has been going on, right there real close to Jerusalem somewhere, which is, you know. But I think it's interesting here, Benjamin, you know, Yahweh's going to dwell between his shoulders. Verse 13. And of Joseph he said. Now I want to go back, I want to read a couple of things before we read this here. Go back to Genesis 48. Genesis chapter 48, look at verse 19. He said, but his father refused. Now, Yaakov had crossed his hands to bless the two children of Joseph. You know, and he put his right hand on the head of Ephraim and his left hand on Manasseh, and then Joseph was trying to say, no, that ain't right, it's supposed to be the other way around. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, talking about Manasseh, and he also shall be great, but truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become, this Bible says a multitude of nations. In the Hebrew it says a melo goyim. The word melo in the Hebrew there is a number 4393. And it means fullness.
93.
4393. And it means fullness. So he shall become the fullness of the goyim, the fullness of the nations, or the fullness of the Gentiles. Why did he send Paul to the Gentile nations of the world? To reach the house of Israel, which had been scattered around all the nations of the world, because the nations of the world was really the fullness of Ephraim. I think that's kind of neat. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that a lot of people would agree with me on that, but and then go to Jeremiah 31. Verse 8, 9, and 10. This whole thing in this chapter 31, let's look at verse 1. He says, at the same time, saith Yahweh, I will be the Elohim of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people. Remember, Hosea talked about those who were his, but he said, you're not mine anymore, you're going to kick them out. He said, in the place where they were called not my people, I will again call them my people. So here in chapter 31, he's still talking about them. In verse 8, he said, behold, verse 7 ends with the remnant of Israel. Y'all see those words there? Verse 8 said, behold, I will bring them from the north country, and gather them from the ends of the earth. among them the blind and the lame, the woman with child, the one who labors with child together. A great throng shall return there. They shall come with weeping and with supplications. I will lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of waters in a straight way in which they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. When we begin to understand the responsibility that the firstborn has, and what is the major portion of it, we can forget about anything as far as land or anything belonging to us, but what is the responsibility of the firstborn? The spiritual head of the household. That means you have to reach your brother with the words of Yahweh. Verse 10, he says, hear the word of Yahweh, O nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say. Now that word is translated isles or islands. It also means coastland. It's the same word. Now there's another place in Scripture that says all the people in the isles, the coastlands, wait for his Torah. And here he's saying too, hear the word of Yahweh, O nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, he who scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd does his flock. Is that saying that Yahweh is going to regather the house of Ephraim, the house of Israel, his firstborn? And he's saying, declare that in all the nations of the world, that he's going to regather them. And yet if you're out there trying to talk to me about the two houses, Israel and Judah, and the responsibility that Ephraim has, and who you are, and keeping the Torah, and all these kind of things, people look at you like you crazy. Have y'all ever noticed that? Well, you're in some kind of cult. They don't, you know what you're doing. And yet, you know what this says to do? Go back to Deuteronomy. Verse 13, and of Joseph he said. Now remember, Joseph was the one who gave birth to who? Ephraim and Manasseh. When Reuben lost the birthright because he went up to his, and slept with his father, and he lost the birthright. It didn't go to the second-born son of Reuben. He went to the firstborn son of the other wife. See, Reuben was firstborn of Leah. It didn't go to his brother. It went to the firstborn of Rachel. And who was that? Joseph. Now, part of it is a double portion, right? The land and goods and all this kind of thing. But if the double portion actually went to the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, that's how the double portion came to Joseph. Verse 13, and of Joseph he said, and y'all remember what the name Joseph means, right? It means Yahweh will add. And through him he's adding what? And all the Gentile people in the world receive salvation because Yahweh is calling home the house of Ephraim, the house of Israel. And of Joseph he said, blessed of Yahweh is his land, which the precious things of heaven, with the dew and the deep lying beneath. Blessed of Yahweh is his land. What was the land that was given to Ephraim and Manasseh? Joseph. It's all of the mountains of Israel. It's what they call today the west bank of the Jordan River. And who are they trying to give that land to? Palestinians, right? All that land up through there along that Jordan River on that west side is, if we are Ephraim, that land's ours. Okay? Yeah, but notice he said, the precious things of heaven with the dew and the deep lying beneath. This word deep always refers to underground rivers and streams of water. So he's saying there's the deep is lying beneath all these mountains in the nation of Ephraim. There is a river that runs down through there and comes down underneath those mountains, and it comes out below Jerusalem at a spring called what? Gihon Spring, Gihon. We'll go back and we'll see it in Genesis when he starts talking about the Garden of Eden, and one of the rivers that went out of the Garden of Eden was the Gihon River. And nobody knows where it is, and yet the scripture here says it's underneath those mountains, a deep running beneath. Scriptures also talk about the water that's going to spring out from under the altar, in Jerusalem, and it's after the earthquake, when the Mount of Olives splits. When that earthquake happens, it's kind of like the river there that begins to bubble up. I think it's kind of, but that kind of fits Scripture, doesn't it? I hope I'm not making something out of it. No. Blessed of Yahweh is His land, with the precious things of heaven, with the dew and the deep lying beneath. With the precious fruits of the sun, with the precious produce of the months, with the best things of the ancient mountains, with the precious things of the everlasting hills, with the precious things of the earth and its fullness, and the favor or kindness or grace of Him who dwelt in the bush. Isn't that amazing? Let come on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him separated from his brothers. The house of Ephraim, scattered in all the Gentile nations of the world, has been preserved until the time of the ingathering.
Which is soon.
Verse 17, His glory is like a firstborn bull. His horns like the horns of the wild ox. I think the King James Bible uses the term unicorn. And then, of course, we have all kinds of legends today about unicorn looking like horses with one horn and so forth. And yet, the unicorn is an old English term. It was used to apply to the offspring of a young bull. I mean, a young bull, the offspring, That's what the word came from. And then, of course, they make up all kinds of stories about it.
Well, it's plural, too, the horns.
Yeah, it's horns, it's not singular. Like the horns are like the horns of the wild ox. Notice this next one. Together with them He shall push the peoples to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim. Now, wait a minute. Yahweh came up with 10,000. Jude said He's coming back with 10,000. Here talking about 10,000s. I think, maybe there's something coincidental, maybe. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim. They are the thousands of Manasseh. I think it's kind of, He's going to push who? The peoples to the ends of the earth. When Ephraim comes home, it's not going to be like Judah coming out of the north, okay? Because Ephraim comes from the north and south, the east, everywhere, right? When Ephraim begins to realize who he is, and Yahweh really begins to bring him home, I know that we're scattered and it seems like few, okay? But if you take a few like us all around the world and bring them all together in one place, it's going to be a bunch of folks. More than we can think of, And when we come together, all I can say is look out, Palestinians, right? Can we go to Isaiah chapter 11? For just a second. In Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 through 10 of this chapter are all about the restoration of the Messianic kingdom. Of not Messianic, but Messiah's kingdom, okay? You can look at all these things and we talked about if this is the 8th day in the future to come and we begin the restoration of all things, then a whole lot of these things will be coming to pass during this 1,000 years that we're facing. Verse 11 says, It shall come to pass in that day, Yahweh shall set His hand again the second time to recover the remnant of His people who are left. So we just got through reading, He's going to bring them from the north to south, Jeremiah and these things. To recover the remnant of His people who are left from Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands or coastlands of the sea. That's just what we're reading over in Jeremiah. Here it is again in Isaiah. Verse 12, he will set up a banner for the nations and will assemble the outcast of Israel. Remember, the nation of Israel was the one that was cast out of the land, so they became the outcast. When you're cast out, that makes you an outcast, right? He will assemble the outcast of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah.
Separated from his brothers.
Bringing the two back together. From the four corners of the earth. Now, in verse 13, it says, also the envy of Ephraim shall depart. You see, a lot of ways right now, Ephraim is coming home, coming back to who they are, and then they're seeing the thing of the Jewish people, and they think, oh my gosh, I've lost my inheritance. I've been robbed of what belonged to me, and now they begin to envy Judah, and they want those things. Unfortunately, sometime when they come back, they go right past the Messiah and convert to Orthodox Judaism. Okay? Remember, some of those things, can be so deceptive, and appear so, so great. But then he says, so the envy of Ephraim shall depart. They're no longer going to envy them. The adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. He says, Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. Now, right now, if we're trying to come home, and we say we're part of the house, part of the whole house of Israel too, and they look at it and say, no, you're nothing but a bunch of Jewish wannabe. You're trying to be like Judah. No, we're not. But they're going to harass us, and then that happening today. So he's saying Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. See, neither one of those things will happen when people begin to realize who you are in the Mashiach. Once you know who you are and what belongs to you, what your responsibilities are, it doesn't matter about somebody else. But then in 14 it said, they shall fly down upon the shoulder of the Philistine. Philistine is where that word Palestinian came from. They're nothing but Philistines. Boy, if they ever get a hold of this tape, I'm in trouble. I'm telling y'all made me say that. They shall fly down upon the shoulder of the Philistine toward the west. That means they're going to go toward the west. When a lot of these Philistines, these Palestinians right now are being what? In Gaza, behind the fence down in Gaza. I heard an interview, and Benjamin Netanyahu was talking, and Cal Thomas was asking him a question about, do you know how many terrorists lately have come out of Gaza? He said, well, I don't know. Or Benjamin asked him, he said, no. He said, maybe, I'd guess bunches of them. He said, no, not a single one since the fence went up. I mean, what was the whole purpose of Israel building a fence in the first place? Want to keep people out, keep a terrorist in, right? Keep them away from Israel. And it's working. But you won't hear that in our media, will you? They're not going to talk about that. And he said they're going to go down and across these Philistines, and then let's talk about the house of Judah and the house of Ephraim together. Together they shall plunder the people of the east. They're going to lay their hand on Edom and Moab, and the people of Ammon shall obey them. So once the two houses are brought together and the Philistines are wiped out, or the Palestinians, okay, then they're going to turn back and go into Jordan, and they're going to take over Moab, Ammon, everything. Because remember, when the whole thing, when that part of the land was given to them, that was all given to Abram, then they're going to take it back. It's theirs. Verse 15 says, Yahweh will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt. With his mighty wind, he will shake his fist over the river. 5104 there, and they say that really means the Euphrates. So everything's going to stretch from the brook of Egypt, or the Nile, back over to the Euphrates. Now, if you take from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates, and then you go up, where the Euphrates River runs up into Turkey and comes from there down into Egypt on the south, that whole area is almost exactly the same size as the city of New Jerusalem, which it says at the end of 1,000 years is going to come down. All them mountains in there are going to be flattened out, and that city is going to come down in that area. And that covers that area, from the Mediterranean all the way into Iraq, Iran, and those areas from Turkey down into Egypt. And the new city of Jerusalem is going to sit there. It's about half the size of the United States right now. 3,000 miles from New York, California. So 1,500 miles is about what we're talking about Verse 15 says, Yahweh will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt. With his mighty wind he will shake his fist over the river and strike it in the 7 streams. I don't know if people realize it or not, but the Nile River runs from south to north. Okay? And when it comes up towards the Mediterranean, it splits into 7 streams, and then the Nile River dumps in the Mediterranean 7 different streams. And that's what he's saying here. He's going to strike it in the 7 streams and make men cross over dry shod. I mean, that somehow or other it's going to be dry enough and we'll be walking through there. Verse 16, there will be a highway for the remnant of his people who will be left from Assyria as it was for Israel in the day that he came up from the land of Egypt. When they came out of Egypt, when Moses led them out, what did he do? The water backed up and dried up, and they went across on dry land. He says it's going to be the same way then as it was back then. Ecclesiastes says what? Whatever was, is that what shall be. So everything he's telling us over and over and over again, by what happened, what's going to happen. Now, if you don't believe what happened, then you're not going to be looking for it to happen again, right? Pretty simple. Okay, go back to Deuteronomy. Verse 18. And of Zebulun he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar in your tents. They shall call the peoples to the mountain. There they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall partake of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hidden in the sand. Zebulun, up in the north, around Galilee and so forth, and it says, in your going out, they were the maritime tribe, who handled, and did a lot of trading by ships and by sea and so forth. Go back to Genesis 49 and look at verse 13. It says, Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He'll become a haven for ships, and his borders shall adjoin Sidon. So that's up in the north, and it's talking about not only between the Sea of Galilee, but also on the shores of the Mediterranean, in that northern area. And then, he said in Issachar, going back to Deuteronomy, Issachar in your tents. Go to 1 Chronicles, chapter 12. In chapter 12, in verse 23, he talks about, said, now these are the numbers of the divisions, or the heads of those that were equipped for the war, that came to David at Hebron to turn over the kingdom of Shaul to him according to the word of Yahweh. So these verses are giving us all the people that came to David and who they are and what tribe they came from and what they brought with them. Verse 24 is the children of Judah, bearing shield and spear, 6,800. Verse 25, the children of Simeon. Verse 26, the children of Levi. And verse 27 says, Jehoiada, the leader of the Aaronites, and with him 3,000 of the descendants of Aaron. We come on down to verse 32. Of the children of Issachar, who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. Their chiefs were 200, and all their brethren were at their command. And then talks of Zebulun, 50,000 who went out to battle, expert in war with all weapons of war, stout-hearted men who could keep ranks, okay? They knew how to keep their place. But in that verse 32, the children of Issachar who had understanding of the times. Up in that area, around the Sea of Galilee, that was, what belonged to Israel. And when Israel was taken captive and Assyria took them out, then they took people from other lands, Gentiles, and brought them in and planted them in the northern area of Israel, up around the Sea of Galilee. It became known then as what? Galilee of the Gentiles. It tells us that over the New Testament Gospel, Galilee of the Gentiles. And it says, to those people who walked in darkness, a great light has shone. Who was the great light that lived up around Galilee? Messiah Yehoshua. Okay? I think it's interesting, those are the ones who received the knowledge, and here it's talking about the children of Issachar who had understanding of the times. It's always been that they're the ones that's going to receive the knowledge, the light, the understanding, and know what to do before anybody else, and they did. There again, it's the same picture of what was is what's going to be. And if it happened, and he said it did, then it's going to happen again. Now, in this passage, going back to Deuteronomy, the word tents there, Israel and Issachar in your tents. I think this is interesting because the Talmud interprets that word tents as meaning houses of or for the study of Torah.
Houses of study.
So they're the ones that had the answers.
They're the ones that had the answers. They're the ones who knew what to do, okay? And where do you find the answers? In the study of the Torah. So, I mean, it may be a Talmudic interpretation, you know, but they get it based on what the Scriptures. How else would you know if you didn't study? If you go, yeah. If we, right now, are we supposed to know the signs of the times? How can we know the signs of the times if we don't study the Scriptures? Now, there are a lot of people out there studying history and trying to make it fit somewhere. There's a difference in looking at what's going on in the world and trying to stick it in the Scripture someplace, and something else to study the Scripture and say, well, this is what he says is going to happen at a certain point in time, and then look to see what's going to happen. Which one came first? The Scripture did, didn't it? Okay. That verse 19, again, he's talking about, you know, they shall partake of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hidden in the sand. That area up in there, around Zebulun, around Galilee and so forth, in later times, these people were active in glass products, which was made from sand. Okay, and silicon products and everything. Also, in that area is where the abundance of what's known as the chilazon, which is a little shellfish from which you get the dye to make the tachelet, which is the blue dye that goes, you know, into the threads and so forth, and the fringe, the zit. Also, you know, that you get the other, you know, animals that make up the scarlet and the purples and all these different things. So these people were active in a lot of that, you know. You know. So in verse 20, it said, and of Gad he said, blessed is he who enlarges Gad. He dwells as a lion and tears the arm and the crown of his head. He provided the first part for himself because the lawgiver of his portion was reserved there. He came with the heads of the people. He administered the justice of Yahweh and his judgments with Israel. Now Gad, if you remember, Gad received his portion allotted to him on the east side of the Jordan River, right? And then he said, okay, we'll build cities and do all this thing, but we'll still go into the land with our brothers. And he said, we won't go back and take ours until after they've all got theirs. So Gad received their portion on the east side of the Jordan. And what they received was larger than the western tribe. If you'll notice on your little map there, you see that area on there, there's Gad. That's a good sized area, you know, and the rest of the thing were kind of small. But they got a very large portion over there. Now it says he dwelt on the border, right? He dwells as a lion and tears the arm and the crown of his head. He enlarges Gad. That's like the border is getting bigger, you know. The way he dwelt on the border, defending his land, and all the others, kind of like he was a sentinel. Right now, what's one of the most important areas in military security in Israel? Is it not the Golan Heights? The Golan Heights, it was way up there on that eastern side of the Jordan, on that land, and from there you have a view of everything. one of the biggest fights, going on between Syria and Israel was to try to take over the Golan Heights, because from there you can set up a big cannon up in the Golan Heights and you can shoot anywhere in Israel you want to. Because you can see from up there everywhere. We have a movie. I think the name of it's called The Impossible Spy. And some of you may have seen it, some of you may not. It's about a man by the name, what was his name? Cohen. And he was recruited to become a spy. And he was recruited, he was Israeli and so forth, but he was actually recruited and he became part of a real good friend with the leader of the Syrian army. And even got the army, and the Syrian army, when they were controlling the Golan Heights, he took him up there and showed him all these embattlements and all the bunkers and everything where they were dug in, so he knew exactly where everything was, Moshe told us that one of the things that Eli Cohen did was he said, man, this is fantastic place you got. He said, but he said, you ought to treat your people better than you do. He said, what are you talking about? He said, well, you got all these men out here in these concrete bunkers, in the sun and it's hot and everything, and, they need some shade. He said, what do you suggest? He said, I think you ought to plant some eucalyptus trees by all the, bunkers so that they can have shade. So he did. And then later on, he just sent word back to Israel, when you go to fight, zero in on the eucalyptus trees.
Phase 7.
Okay. Now, he was one of the ones, that was captured and so forth. And their battle had been raging between Syria and Israel for a long time because they've never returned his body. It's amazing sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, right? Anyway, that's all up in that area. Okay? At the same time, it talks about because a lawgiver's portion was reserved there. Look over in chapter 34, verse 5. In verse 6, so Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died there in the land of Moab according to the word of Yahweh, and he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day. That land was the land that was given to Gad, and that was a portion, the lawgiver's portion. That's where Moses, the lawgiver, was buried. I think that's kind of interesting. So who does that land belong to, even though they say it's Jordan? But who's it really belong to? Okay? It's still all part of the children of Israel, right? Okay, verse 22. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. See, that Bashan, the Golan Heights, is also known as Bashan.
And this is all of him, that little round circle.
Yeah. Not much of it up there, is it? Now, Dan never did really take the land that was allotted to him. But he had a little portion down in the south, and he had a little portion up in the north. And the Jordan River begins in the north at a place called Tel Dan. Okay? And then it runs all the way down. It's like the Yarden, the Jordan River, the Yarden, it means the descender, okay? So like Dan, kind of goes up in the north, and he's got a place down in the south. Yahweh is the descender through Yehoshua, right? And he said, I didn't come to judge, but yet, everything can be judged by his word, so he is the judge. And yet the name Dan means judge. Messiah judged not people, but he judged sin. You see the difference? Dan was trying to judge people. Messiah is actually judging sin. We have 5 books of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Right? And then the 6th book is what? Yehoshua. And then the 7th, like the 7,000 years, is the book of what? Judges. Dan means what? Judge. We have the Torah, then we have Book of Yehoshua, and then we have Judgment. Maybe that's just a coincidence. In verse 23, and of Naphtali he said, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full of the blessing of Yahweh, possess the west and the south. That word west there, 32:20, is actually the word Ya'am, and it means sea. So he's saying possess the sea and the south. So that's like Galilee and the southern portion of it.
That's not west?
No, it's really not west. That's the number 32:20, Ya'am.
That's the right number for that word there.
It's the right number, 32:20. Yes, Ya'am, sea. In Ezekiel 48, in verse 3, 48, In verse 3 there, the future portion of the land of Naphtali runs from the east side to the west side. Okay? Now that's from the Sea of Galilee to the Mediterranean on the west side. That's that future portion of land, all the way from Galilee, all the way over to the Mediterranean. We go to Isaiah chapter 9. You know, an interesting study sometime is you take the name of the tribe, Asher, Naphtali, one of the others, and just go through all the scriptures pertaining to one chapter, see if you can find everything in there that it says about that particular tribe. You'll wind up with 12 different studies, okay? But you'll be amazed at some of the things that you can glean from those things. Isaiah chapter 9, in verse 1 and 2. So nevertheless the gloom will not be upon her who is distressed, as when at first he lightly esteemed the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward more heavily oppressed her by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan in Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them the light has shined. You know, in a lot of ways right now, we've got all these suicide bombings and going on up there, you know, and they just, you know, had a suicide bombing in Haifa. It's all this land up there in the north. You might call that right now the land of the shadow of death, because they're kind of in a pause. Anything can happen at any time up there. So if light shined in there at one time, it's going to do so again. And that's what it says in Ecclesiastes. Go to Matthew 4. Verses 12 through 17. Verse 12. Now when Yehoshua heard that Yochanan had been put in prison, he departed to Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capharnaum, which is by the sea, in the regions of Zebulun and Naphtali, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying. Now Isaiah said, all right, the great light has dawned upon them. And now it says, Yehoshua is coming to live there, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness saw a great light, and upon those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time Yehoshua began to preach and to say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has drawn near. You think there's, you know, little meaning to some of these things back over in the prophets, or every word has some specific function that's going to be completed at some point in time. Okay. Verse 24. And of Asher he said, Asher is most blessed of sons. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him dip his foot in oil. Your sandals will be iron and copper. As your days, so shall your strength be. Now, according to Talmud, this area of Asher, talking about let him dip his foot in oil, this was where all the best olive trees were grown in the land of Israel. This was the land that they had to go back up to get oil. You know, when they rebuilt and rededicated the temple, and they had to go back up in the land of Asher to get oil specifically for the menorah in the temple, because they couldn't use just any kind of oil. It had to be the special one. So that was that area that they were going to. The name Asher itself means happy. Okay? Now we're talking about your sandals will be iron and copper. Wherever you walk, you'll be protected, and as safe as being protected by the bars of iron, which is strength, and copper, which is justice. Do we want justice for ourselves or mercy?
Mercy.
Okay. The word sandal in that passage, the numbers 45:15 from 52:74. Not all. It means to shoe or put sandals on. The phrase is kind of like we put shoes on a horse. Okay? And we put iron shoes on the horse to protect them wherever they go, right? To protect them. That's what this whole phrase means, okay? And the terms iron and copper refer to the protection of his walk as he's walking in Torah. Verse 26, he said, there is no one like the El of Yeshurun. See, there's the same word Yeshurun again, the El of the upright, who rides the heavens to help you, and in his excellency on the clouds. You know, he went away in a cloud, right? And the angel was standing there and said, why you look, this same Messiah who you saw go away is going to return in like manner. He went on the cloud, he's going to come back in the cloud. There's many places that talk about Yahweh coming in the clouds, especially in the last days. Go to Matthew 24. You know, it's amazing to me how people can sit around and read New Testament scriptures without going back and looking at the old, the Torah and so forth, and finding all the passages and bring them all together, because they're such a beautiful picture. One doesn't conflict the other. I don't feel like when we're trying to walk in obedience to Torah that we're trying to put ourselves in bondage. There's nobody here that's trying to walk in obedience to Torah to receive your salvation. It's only because we've already received our salvation we're trying to learn what we're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And as we learn, that's the joy, it seems to me. In Matthew 24, look at verse 30. So then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Go to chapter 26. In verse 64. I don't think sometimes people realize how long some of these chapters are in the gospel. How many verses there are in them. In verse 62, I want to read down to 64. It says, and the high priest arose and said to him, do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But Yehoshua kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, I adjure you by the living Elohim that you tell us if you are the Mashiach, the son of Elohim. Verse 64, Yehoshua said to him, it is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then one there, he's fixing to what? They're going to kill him. And he said, you're going to see me coming. Go to Mark 13. Starting in verse 24. He said, but in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars of heaven will fall, and the powers in heaven will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with great power and glory. Then he will send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest part of earth to the farthest part of heaven. Everybody's going to be gathered together with him when he comes back at that time. And he's coming on the clouds. In Mark 14, look at verse 62. Now he's being tried here by the Sanhedrin. In verse 62, and Yehoshua said, I am. We have to go back to verse 61. But he kept silent and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him, saying to him, Are you the Mashiach, the Son of the Blessed One? Yehoshua said, what did he say? He said, Ani, I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven. It's the same thing we saw in the other place. Go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Starting verse 13, he said, But I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep or died, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. But if we believe that Yehoshua died and rose again, even so Elohim will bring with him those who have died in Yehoshua. For this we say to you by the word of Yahweh, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of Yahweh will by no means precede those who are asleep. For Yahweh himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trump of Elohim, and the dead in Messiah will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet Yahweh in the air, and thus we shall always be with Yahweh. Therefore comfort one another with these words. Now along with this, Messiah said, Where I go you know, and the way you know. And he said, If I go, then I will come and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Where is he? The right hand of the Father. Isn't that where he said he's going to come back and receive us to go be with him where he is? And then they all come back to the earth. Two separate functions. The way I see it, okay? Go back to Deuteronomy. We're reading in verse 26, There's no one like the El of Yeshurun, the upright, who rides the heavens to help you, and in his excellency on the clouds. The eternal Elohim is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will thrust out the enemy from before you, and will say, Destroy. Then Israel shall dwell in safety, the fountain of Yaakov alone, in the land of grain and wine. His heavens shall also drop dew. Happy are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by Yahweh, the shield of your help, the Maggid of your help, and the sword of your majesty. Your enemies shall submit to you, and you shall tread down their high places. Literally that's saying you shall tread down their places for pagan worship. Would this be a time to ask the question, I wonder if he's going to give us all sledgehammers, we're going to get to go from corner to corner tearing down all them. Yeah. Chapter 34. Well, I mean, if you're going to tear down places of pagan worship, right? That would be any place that's adopted all those pagan practices, right? And called them something else.
We don't have to wait till then.
Excuse me?
I said, I hope we don't have to wait till then.
I got a feeling it ain't very long. Chapter 34. It's not going to take very long because there's only 12 verses here in chapter 34. But you know, Simeon was not in those, in those things, those blessings. Chapter 34. Then Moshe went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho. And Yahweh showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan. Mount Nebo. The word Nebo is the number 5015. The word itself, take it back, not necessarily in the Strong, but you take it back in the Brown Driver Briggs, the word Nebo also means prophet.
Means what?
Prophet.
Oh, okay.
So he went up on the mountain of the prophet. Verse 2, he says, all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean, the south, and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. Then Yahweh said to him, this is the land of which I swore to give Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, saying, I will give it to your descendants. Boy, that covers the whole thing in through there, okay? I have caused you to see with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there. So Moshe, the servant of Yahweh, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of Yahweh, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows his grave to this day. Moshe was 120 years old when he died. And we know that he wandered, with the children, in the wilderness for 40 years, right? And then he died. It says he was 120. We know that when he left Egypt, he was 40. So he got 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness, and 40 years down in Midian. Moses was never in the land of Israel until he appeared, to Moshe, up on that mountain. Yehoshua. The thing that I'm thinking is Moses, here you got 80 years before he started to lead and learn. That would make him truly an assimilated Jewish man, wasn't it? A Hebrew. I mean, he was assimilated into the culture. 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in Midian. And then he had to start from scratch learning. And it all started with the voice from the bush. And he spent 40 years learning and writing, and they were living what we are studying and learning today. And he said, show me your ways. And if we study this very carefully, we'll realize that these and what he's giving us are his ways. And if we do the things that's called out in the Scriptures, we'll be walking in his ways. But you can't compromise it, you can't change it, you can't modify it. Because if you do, it's no longer his. Verse 8 says, and the children of Israel wept Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moshe ended. Verse 9, now Yehoshua ben Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moshe had laid his hands on him, so the children of Israel heeded him and did as Yahweh had commanded Moshe. But since then there has not arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom Yahweh knew face to face. Is there any question whatsoever that Moses was a prophet? And all the signs and wonders which Yahweh sent him to do in the land of Egypt before Pharaoh, before all his servants, and in all his land, and by all that mighty power and all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. That completes the reading of Deuteronomy. And what is it traditionally said we do now? You ready? Kazak, Venice Kazak, be strong, and may we be strengthened. We just completed the Torah. Before we go back and start in Genesis 1, I want to go over here in Joshua, the book of Yehoshua, in chapter 1. We'll read verses 1 through 9. That after the death of Moshe, the servant of Yahweh, It came to pass that Yahweh spoke to Yehoshua ben Nun, Moses' assistant. Doesn't it sound strange to hear some, the words say that Yehoshua was Moses' assistant? Saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now Yahweh is speaking to Yehoshua. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, as I said to Moses. From the wilderness, and this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and to the great sea toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall stand before you all the days of your life. You'll notice he doesn't say that no man's going to come out against you. He said no man shall stand against you. It's the same way with us. We're going to have all kinds of people try to come out against us, okay? But as long as we stand strong on what this word says, they can't stand against it. The word won't let them. As I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Verse 7, only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the Torah which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. That word prosper is the number 79:19. It means to have success or to act wisely. But the best meaning means to make the right decision always at the right time. I mean, can you imagine how great that would be? Make the right decision at the right time.
Like Ezra.
And that's all based on walking in obedience to Yahweh's word. Yeah, just like Ezra and Nehemiah. In verse 8 he said, this book of the law, actually that's saying this Sefer Torah, this transcribing of the Torah, shall not depart from your mouth. But you shall, we have the word meditate. The Hebrew says, be constantly in it, day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Now that word success is the number 79:19. Same number as the word prosper up in verse 7. Isn't that neat? Verse 9 he says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for Yahweh Eloheka is with you wherever you go. We're doing the same thing. We're following Yehoshua into the promised land, right? Yehoshua is going by what the word of Yahweh said to him, and he's keeping the word before his face at all times, and he's not going to turn from it to the right or the left. And if we're following him, we're walking in his footsteps, right? So if he follows the Torah, why don't we? I don't know how anybody can get away from that picture that's in that scripture. Go back to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to go through this pretty quick because I do want to get into Ecclesiastes. And we're going to read the whole Megillah. But in Genesis 1, and it's like, if we were beginning, the new beginning on this day, Messiah Yehoshua was here, and we as the bride, and we started out, and now he's telling us, and he's saying, in the beginning. And realize what he says to us in that day in the future, whenever it is going to be exactly what he's saying to us right here. The difference is going to be he will speak with the authority and we'll have the complete understanding of what he's saying. A lot of the shadowy stuff is going to be gone, and we're going to have that knowledge to know. I think that's a tremendous thing to look forward to. But that doesn't appeal to anybody who really has no desire to know what Scripture is saying in the first place. If they don't care about it, it's not going to make any difference. Verse 1, Bereshit, in the beginning, in the firstborn, in the Reshit. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of Elohim was hovering over the face of the waters. Verse 3, Elohim said, the Hebrew here says, Elohim said, light be, like what? Now, go over to John, Gospel of John, chapter 1. In verse 1, John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. He was in the beginning with Elohim. There again, if you go back, he was in the Reshit. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from Elohim whose name was Yochanan. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which gives light to every man who comes into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But he's talking about the light, right? And he's talking about the light that was in the beginning. And you go back to Genesis again, and he's saying, Yahweh said, or Yehoshua, Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good, and Elohim divided the light from the darkness. This was before he created the sun and the moon and all these things, right? This is in the beginning. Now he called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day, or the first day. Paul, in his writings, he said, are we not all sons of the day and not sons of the night? You go back then to that day, talking about, Yehoshua, Yahweh, it's himself in the body and everything that he created for himself. Verse 6, then Elohim said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Thus Elohim made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And Elohim called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. By the way, that word second is the word Shmini. Verse 9, then Elohim said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry appear, and it was so. Now this firmament he called heaven, which, is like this shell around the earth, and everything was underneath it, and everything under this shell is where the waters were, that he drew together and separated from the waters above. In different places here. In verse 10, and Elohim called the dry earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And Elohim saw it was good. Then Elohim said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb yielding seed according to its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw, or Elohim saw, that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the third day. Verse 14. Then Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. Now he said down there that these lights are going to be for signs and seasons and for days and years. Now, are we supposed to go by those things? Do we go out and look at the moon to find out when the beginning of the month is? We're using those things in to establish the seasons, right? Everything's based on it. The agricultural seasons that we have are all based on the times of the sun and the moon, are they not? Even the ancient almanacs used to go by the planting time based on what? Based on the moon. Yeah, still do. I mean, a lot of people knew something, back a long time ago. Verse 16, then Elohim made two great lights, or actually he made two great luminaries. The greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Isn't that kind of neat? If we think of the sun being the greater light, but the greater light to rule the day, he called the light day. He's the light. You know, if he's the day, if we're sons of the light, we're sons of the day, and yet he's supposed to rule over us, so he's supposed to be our king. When you go back in and put these meanings in it, it's still a picture of Messiah and who we follow. Verse 17. Elohim set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw it was good. So the evening and the morning were the fourth day. The greater lights that he created on the fourth day was to rule over everything that was created on the first, second, and third day. Right? Is that what he's saying? Now in verse 20 it says, Then Elohim said, Let the waters abound with abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So Elohim created great sea creatures, and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And Elohim saw it was good. And Elohim blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Then Elohim said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, according to its kind, and it was so. And Elohim made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and Elohim saw it was good. Then Elohim said, Let us make man in our image. Who's he speaking to? It's Yahweh and Yehoshua. According to our likeness, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Now this our likeness. Yahweh is a spirit, and the Father of spirits, is he not? Yehoshua then inhabits the body that he created for him. So their likeness is a spirit and a body. He created the body of Adam in the earth, and then he breathed his spirit into that body, and he became what? A soul. Is that three creatures, or is that one using the other? In the simplicity of it. Verse, again, 26. And Elohim said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Now he gave the sun and the moon, dominion over everything that was created on the first 3 days. But now he created the birds, the fish, the cattle, and everything, and he gave dominion over all them to who? To this man that he's created. Mankind has dominion over all those things. Verse 27, So Elohim created man in his image. In the image of Elohim he created him. Male and female he created them. Then Elohim blessed them, and Elohim said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So who had dominion over the earth? Adam and Eve. Right? Now when they begin to obey Satan, then what? They became slaves to him, and when you become a slave to somebody, then everything you own belongs to whoever you serve. He didn't have a moral right to do what he did, but he had the legal right. Because Yahweh had given him dominion, and he had the right to do with it what he wanted to. Verse 29, And Elohim said, See, I have given you every herb yielding seed which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it shall be for food. Verse 30, Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the earth, to everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food, and it was so. What did man and animal and bird and everything that lived eat? Same thing. Green herbs, that's what everything ate, that right? Man didn't eat animals, animals didn't eat men, animals didn't eat other animals. It's the same way it was when Noah led all of them into the ark, right? All of them ate the same thing. I mean, that's pretty neat. A tiger lie down right beside the rabbit, both of them eating grass. Verse 31, then Elohim saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day, Yom Shishit. Chapter 2, thus the heavens and the earth, and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day Elohim ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then Elohim blessed the seventh day, and sanctified or set it apart. He just blessed any old day and just set them apart and said, well, you can pick any one you want to. I mean, I can't imagine somebody saying, nowhere in the scripture does he say the seventh day is the Sabbath. He blessed the seventh day and set it apart, because in it he rested from all his work which Elohim had created and made. That concludes the Torah portion for this day, and we'll go back next Shabbat and we'll begin again in Genesis 1, and we'll get into it a little bit deeper. But if you will, now go with me to the book of Ecclesiastes. This, in the Hebrew, what we call Ecclesiastes, in the Hebrew, it's the word Kohelet, like K-O-H-E-L-E-T-A, Kohelet. The word itself is found only in the book of Ecclesiastes, no place else. The word means to convoke an assembly or to assemble. Therefore, the whole word means one who addresses an assembly, i.e., a preacher. That's what he's saying. And that's who he says he is, a preacher. So in verse 1 of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Yerushalayim. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. I think you're going to find the key word in the whole book of Ecclesiastes is vanity. Okay? The number of that word is 1892. The Hebrew word is the word hevel, like H-E-H-V-E-H-L, hevel. The word means emptiness. It means something of no real worth. In verse 3 he said, what profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? What profit does he have? We're going to find out the only profit you got is self-satisfaction from doing, what you're supposed to do. If you stop and think about it, what Yahweh has given us to do, He's given us to work. And we're supposed to be satisfied with the fruit of our labor, right? And that's all you're supposed to worry about, okay? Go to John chapter 8. John 8, verse 23. He said to them, you are from beneath, I am from above. You are of this world, and I am not. Or he said, I am not of this world. He made man, put him in this world, okay, and this is where we're supposed to operate. So whatever task He's given us to do in this world, is to prepare ourselves for when He takes us into another world. So this is a training ground, and everything we're learning here is we're learning what we're going to do in the future. In verse 4 he says, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. You ever heard people say, well, the earth's going to go away, be destroyed, not going to be anymore, it's going to be burned up? How come this says the earth abides forever? Somebody doesn't understand what they're talking about. Verse 5, the sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south and turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. He's saying, water, evaporates, goes up, makes rain, rain comes down, runs in the river, rivers run in the sea, and the whole thing starts all over again. He said, yes, the sea never gets full. Verse 8, all things are full of labor. Actually, Hebrew, he said, all the things are wearisome. Man cannot express. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Remember when Paul went into the place, in Mars Hill and everything, he said the Greeks, he said all the people came together. Now all they wanted to know is they were searching for some kind of new teaching. They were all searching for something new, okay? Well, said the Greeks, seek after some kind of new knowledge, and yet the Jews always want a sign. One seeks after a sign, works after new knowledge. Always somebody seeking, right, and never satisfied. That word things there in verse 8 is the number 1697. It's actually the word dabar. It means a word or a matter is spoken of, okay? So all things, all matters are full of labor. Everything involves some type of work. In verse 9 it said, that which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything has been created of old. Okay? In our society, in very modern time, we think, well, let's say, for instance, radio and television, right? Well, we've invented, we've created, No. All we've learned to do is utilize what was already there. Think about it. Did man make radio waves? They're already there. Did we make, video waves? They're already there. Did we make sound waves? We didn't make any of that stuff. Who made it? Yahweh did. All we've learned to do is learn how to use it. I don't know if we ever thought about that or not. But,
Well, that he gave us the smarts to use it.
Verse 10, is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. Even if we look at the theory or the physics of air conditioning, heat transfer. Isn't that all air conditioning is moving the heat from one place to another? And all we've learned to do is learn to use the elements that create that phenomenon and put them in the right order, and it happens. But we didn't create it. We just found out how to use it, okay? Did we create electricity? No, we found out how to hook it up to a wire, make the wire get hot and glow, and call it light. Okay? But we didn't create the light. Yahweh did. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new, it has already been in ancient time before us, there's no remembrance of the former. Everybody likes to think, oh, well, it's brand new. Let's talk about that, in just a moment now. Children. I'm not trying to be gross or anything, but children grow up right now and all of a sudden somebody discovers sex, right? Guess what I found? No. It's always been there. Ain't nothing new. I mean, any distortion, they did that too, right? So what is there new to be discovered? You hear what he's saying? Verse 11, there's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of those that are to come by those who will come after. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This grievous task El has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised or afflicted. A lot different afflicted and exercised, isn't it? But the task that he's given us is supposed to teach us, is supposed to learn. I mean, somebody once said there's no free lunch, right? And yet there's always somebody out here wanting to promise you something for nothing. And there are lots of people out there looking for somebody to get rich quick without having to do nothing to get it. Called a scam. Have you ever stopped and thought about something? You know, a lot of people get conned every day, right? And in the con, there's always something in there that's going to cause somebody to fall for this so they can get something for nothing. You can't con an honest man. Think about that. If he's not willing to get involved in that, then he's not going to go for it. Okay. That word exercise reflected the number 6031. Actually, the word to depress, to make gloomy, or to dispirit. Literally or figurative sense, okay? And the word task, this task that he's given, the number 6045, in Young, it means employment. The job that he's given all of us, okay? Now in verse 14 he said, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. That word wind there is a number 7307. Talking about spirit, breeze, wind, air. You're grabbing at the air. You understand that the picture he's pointing, you can't catch the air. You can't grab nothing. And yet everything people do is trying to grab something that they really can't grab in the first place. In vain or vanity, if you're talking about the word vain itself, V-A-I-N, it means thinking too highly of one's appearances or accomplishments, and etc., etc., etc. In vain. People think too highly of what they've done, and really they haven't done anything. In verse 15 it says, what is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be numbered. He said, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. He said, I set my heart, myself, to know to do these things, and he said, this is grasping for the wind. In verse 18, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. We can all attest to that, can't we?
Yes.
The more we learn, the more we realize about salvation and everything, the more we see how many people are rejecting it, and it creates sorrow, doesn't it? It really does. So is this true? Chapter 2 said, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. But surely this also is vanity. He said in his heart, he's saying to himself, okay? Mirth, Numbers 8057. The word there is the word simcha. We've heard like simchat Torah, rejoicing in the Torah. This is the word mirth, rejoice, I will test you with rejoicing, therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this also is vanity. Now that word pleasure there is the number 2896. It's the Hebrew word tov, which means good or goodness. But I said of laughter, it is madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? The word madness, the number is 1984, Hallel. It means to make slow or to boast or to be clamorously foolish. And then he's saying, what does it accomplish? This mirth, this rejoicing, this partying, if people do these things, we're going to go to a party or we're going to go do this or that. If you're going to go and do it to fill some inner craving that you have, okay? That really doesn't fill what you're searching for, okay? So you get to the point where you cry and you crave it more and more, whether it's partying or whether it's drinking or whatever this goes into, whatever these things lead to that you're doing to try to fill some inner thing. It doesn't do it, but you find out that while you crave it more and more, you've got to go do it more and more, and the satisfaction you receive from it becomes shorter and shorter periods of time. And since the satisfaction gets shorter and shorter, you got to do it more and more to try to get what you thought you had. And the next thing you know, you're in this vicious cycle, and you're addicted to it, and there's no way out of it, right?
There's a void, and you're looking for something to
Yeah,
fill
there's a
that
void, and there's something to fill it, but and this is what you're searching for, but it's not there. Verse 3, he says, I searched in my heart to gratify my flesh with wine while guiding my heart with wisdom and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Yahweh gave him this wisdom. Verse 10. Now, he mentioned up there the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. The special treasures of kings and the special treasures of anybody who's got a lot of money is always something that requires protection and safekeeping. Something you got to put in the safe. Something you got to keep somebody else from trying to get. Something you got to try to prevent somebody else from stealing. Verse 10, he said, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward or my portion from all my labor. That word reward, the number is 2506. It means an allotment. And the word labor, the number is 5999, and it's toil or the wearing effort, both physically or mentally. All these things is what he created for himself to do because of his labor. And what he created in his labor was something that required more and more labor. Verse 11, then I looked on all the works that my hands had done and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. That word profit, the number is 3504. It's the Hebrew word yithron, and it means a preeminence or gain. He said there's no preeminence or gain. In verse 12 he says, then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he's already done. When a man comes in and takes over from the king, what can he do that the king hadn't already done? And there's no king that ever lived was greater than Solomon, so anybody else is always going to be lesser than that, right? Verse 13, then I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. So folly was all the other things that he was pursuing. The light, is the wisdom, right? And wisdom is what? The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. Verse 14, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. He can't see. Yet I myself perceive that the same event happens to them all. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me, and why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity or worthlessness. For there is no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise one die? Same as a fool. Both die the same. Whether you're smart or whether you're dumb, you're going to die. It doesn't make any difference. Verse 17. Therefore I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and grasping for the wind. In everything that Solomon's telling us, in everything that he was grasping for in this world and trying to find this or do that or build this or build that or gain this or gain that and everything, he said when it's all over and done with, it's all a waste of time. It's worthless, right? When you leave this world, you're going to leave it just like you came, with nothing. And whoever comes behind you is going to either what, destroy or something. There's nothing left there. So the lesson is what? Follow Yahweh. Because it's only through Him and His Word and what we look for in the end that has any lasting value.
Then everything's ours.
Go to Hebrews chapter 11, just in regards to that verse 17.
Chapter 11.
Verses 13 through 16. I think that the writer of Hebrews understood the concept of what we're talking about here now. Verse 13, he said, these all died in faith. Now, they've gone through, listing all those people. People talk about this being the Hall of Fame chapter and so forth. But he said, these all died in faith, or trusting, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured, embraced, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. Truly, if they had called to mind that from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly. Therefore Elohim is not ashamed to be called their Elohim, for He has prepared a city for them. So we're looking forward to that city, not made with hands, the one that He has prepared, which is eternal in the heavens. It takes, you need to concentrate your efforts on that instead of these efforts, on a day-to-day out here in the world. You do the things you have to do to survive, right? But that's not where your true life really is. It's with Him in that eternal city to come. It's hard, for us to learn to look at that, and especially when all we've ever been taught out here is, you got to live in the world. Got to keep the job. Job's the number one thing. If you ain't got a job, you can't feed your family. So you got to have the job. Everything number one. And it all comes back to what? Job number one. Love.
Yahweh.
Been changed around. In verse 18 he said, then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill. Yet he must leave his heritage or his portion to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what has man for all his labor, and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, and his work grievous. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. You ever thought about the man who has nearly everything, and he spends all his time trying to figure out and try to figure some way to keep people from stealing it or getting it or keep from losing it or something, you know? And that's what they're consumed with. You either consume with getting it or keeping it. You've heard me say this before. You know, the way of the world is to get all you can all you get, and then sit on the can. In verse 24, there's nothing better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of Elohim. Nothing better that he should eat and drink. So he's going to eat and drink, and he's going to enjoy it from the fruits of his labor. Go to Luke chapter 12. Starting in verse 15. We'll start in verse 13. Then one from the crowd said to him, Teacher, or Rabbi, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. But he said to him, Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? And he said to them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I'll do this. I'll pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. He said, I'm going to tear down my barn and build a bigger one. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But Elohim said to him, You fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward Elohim. The same for the rich young ruler. You know, when he said, give everything you got to the poor and come follow me. And he went away sad, for he had great things, He didn't have them, they had him. He was addicted to them, living in those things. Go back to Ecclesiastes. Verse 25, he said, For who can eat or who can have enjoyment more than I? Solomon was the richest man in the world. He said, who can have more than I can? Verse 26, For El gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. Boy, that tells you right now who he's going to favor, right? Or no, or maybe we can't gain favor from Yahweh. Isn't that what people say? All we got is His grace. Whatever that is. But to the sinner He gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to the good before El. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. But to the sinner He gives the work of gathering and collecting, that may give to he who is good before El. The sinner doesn't realize what he's doing out there, gathering up all this stuff. He's gathering to give to somebody else. You know what he's saying? Go to Proverbs 13.
It all belongs to us. We just don't know it yet. Proverbs 12.
13. In verse 22. You know, most of the church out there is teaching. Now, I'm sure y'all have all heard this, where they talk about the wealth of the sinners laid up, and hey, it's going to all be given to us because we're the righteous. You know, we're the faith group, or we're the whatever. Verse 22 says, the good man, implied, leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous.
They only knew what righteous meant.
Yeah, if they only knew what righteous meant. So it's only going to be stored up for those who are walking in obedience to Him, who become the bride. And after everybody else is destroyed, right, whatever's left goes to who? The righteous that are left. Go back to Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. I don't know. Y'all know how many songs have been written based on these next few verses in this book. You know, to everything there's a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. That word "season," the Numbers 21:65. It's the Hebrew word "zimon," and it means an appointed occasion. Almost a moed, yeah. To everything there's a season, an appointed occasion, a time for every purpose under heaven. Now in verse 2 it says a time to be born. A lot of people have said, oh, well, then Yahweh knows the day I was going to be born. No, that's not what that says. It says there's a time to bear young. Okay? If a woman conceives and she's going to carry a child for 280 days, and the time to bear or to give birth is at the end of that 280 days, it's not saying that your appointed time to be born is going to come. That's not what it's saying. You see the difference? Because a lot of people look at that and the way it's written in the English and they think, oh, well, you know, God, you know, He knew when I was going to be born, and in the minute, the day that it hit, I popped out. No, that's not what it's saying. A time to bear and a time to die. A time to plant, a time to pluck what is planted. This time to die is based on something in your life, and you're going to die at a certain time. A time to plant, that's based on the seasons. There's time to plant and there's time not to plant. I mean, I don't think the time to plant would be to plant when it's fixing to be a snowstorm and an ice storm the next, 6 weeks. It's not exactly the time to plant, is it? When things begin to turn warm and the ground begins to get warm and the sun begins to get warm, then it's the time to plant. A time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. If we go back and if we study these verses and all these things that He's saying and look at each one of them individually and see how it applies in our life, okay? All of a sudden we'd get a whole lot more insight into how we're supposed to behave as human beings, as individuals. I mean, there's times in talking with people, you can be witnessing to people or talking to them or something, and somebody begins to get exactly, mad or angry or something, you realize, ooh, it's time to shut up.
I don't see that one in here anywhere, doing it.
But you see what I'm saying? When you begin to study those and apply them in your life, He's saying that if you'll see and read the signs of the times, you'll know when it's the time to do certain things. But most people just say, oh, well, it's already pre-appointed, it's going to happen at the right time, I don't have to worry about it. And that's not what it's saying. Verse 9, what profit has the worker from that which he labors, from that in which he labors? That I have seen the Elohim given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in His time. Also, He has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that Elohim does from beginning to end. He's put eternity in their hearts, right? That's kind of like a desire for eternity, desire to live forever, right? But then He's also set it up. The only way you can live forever is what? In Messiah Yehoshua, because that's where eternal life is. And it's in the knowledge of Him and His Son is where eternal life is, what it says in John, right? Verse 12, I know that there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of Elohim. You realize how many people out there want to get all they can without having to labor for it? They work hard trying to find a way to get around working to get something. If they'd just expend that much labor and work to begin with, they wouldn't have to worry about that. And you realize that nobody can keep you from working, right? Yahweh said if you don't work, you don't eat. He didn't say if you don't work and get paid, you don't eat. He just said if you don't work, you don't eat. You can work whether you're getting paid or not. I mean, you can work if nothing else, get a broom and go downtown, start sweeping the sidewalk. You working, right? You know, we've got these ideas that we put on things. You know, but it has to meet our idea of what it is before it's really, meets Yahweh's idea. Instead of searching what His words. If you don't work, you don't eat. And the greatest work you can do is to prepare yourself for the eternity to come. Verse 14. I know that whatever Elohim does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. We've read that in so many places. Elohim does that men should fear before Him. Verse 15 again. That which is has already been, and what is to be has already been. And Elohim requires an account of what is past, or Elohim requires an account of what you pursue. Okay? What are you seeking after? What are you pursuing? Is it what He told you to seek after, or is it what you want? Sometimes there's a difference. Verse 16. Moreover, I saw under the sun in the place of judgment, wickedness was there, and in the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. I mean, and you look around, when a group of us get together, we're all trying to be so righteous and everything, somebody somewhere is doing something that's wrong, iniquity's in there. And if you get, in an area where there's something so wicked and everything, and somebody's doing something that's good for somebody, then there's some righteousness there. I mean, you just can't say everything is one way or the other, because we can't see it all. Verse 17, he said, I said in my heart, Elohim shall judge the righteous and the wicked. For the time there for every purpose and for every work. I said in my heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, Elohim test them, that they may see that they themselves are beasts. We're tested to see if we walk in obedience to His word. If we don't, then we what? We follow our own desires, and that's the same thing as what animals do. They do what they want to do. 19, for what happens to the sons of men also happens to beasts. One thing befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over beasts for all his vanity. The same breath, the same air that we breathe, they breathe. No difference, right? Verse 20, all go to one place, all are from the dust, and all return to dust. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men which goes upward, and the spirit of the beast which goes down to the earth? So I perceive there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage, or that's his portion or his lot. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? I mean, who can tell you what's going to happen after you're gone? Nobody. The only one that can tell us what's going to happen in the future is the one that wrote this scripture. It's called Yahweh, and He's the one that tells us what's going to happen in the future. And He said, I tell you beforehand so that when it happens, you'll know that I am Yahweh. That's what He said. Chapter 4, then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors was power, but they have no comforter. Therefore I praise the dead who were already dead, more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who has never existed, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. He said the one that never been born yet is better off than the one that has and all these other things. Again, I saw that for all toil and every skillful work, a man is envied by his neighbor. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Everybody envies somebody who's got more than they have. And people think, boy, I wish Yahweh had given me the gift he gave that guy. Or if I'd been given the gift that he's got, I'd use it different from him. I'd do better than he's done with it. I mean, it's just not the things that happen.
Yeah.
Verse 5. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Better is a handful with quietness than both hands full, toiling and grasping for the wind. I mean, that's a strong statement, isn't it? Then I returned, and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone without companion. He is neither son nor brother. Yet there's no end to all his labors, nor is his eye satisfied with riches. The implication is, but yet he never asked this question. For whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? There are people, I mean, we've heard of people out there, you know, from years gone past, they just worked themselves to death in a gold mine somewhere, you know, out digging out, trying to get the gold and everything. Putting it in the bag, sticking it on the floorboards of the house, you know, storing all this thing up, and the next thing you know, they're dead. They ain't got no family, no children, no nothing, and what happened to their gold? What was it all for?
Yeah.
For whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? They never asked themselves this question. He said, this also is vanity and a grave misfortune. Misfortune there means what? Making a wrong choice in business. Verse 9 said, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one be warm alone? I think it's kind of interesting. Y'all remember the movie The Frisco Kid? And they're out there in that winter storm and the snow is blowing and everything, you know, and they lie down, you know, and he's there, and then he asks to tell me again. He said, we're doing that to keep her warm, right? He said, yeah. In the movie. I mean, I don't mean to be light about it, but it's amazing how many times they go back and they actually use from scriptures and they put it in movies, and we see the things in movies, you know, and we think it's funny, but yet the scriptures are really trying to teach us some truth. Verse 12, it says, though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. In a marriage, you know, if Yahweh is number 1 with the man and number 1 with the wife, then you have a threefold cord there that's not easily broken, it said. And there's strength in that. But he's got to be number 1 in your life. If he's not number 1 with both, it's going to come unraveled somewhere. Verse 13, better is a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who will be admonished no more. Verse 14, for he comes out of prison to be king, although he was born poor in his kingdom. Talking about this youth, okay? So the poor child leaves the house of prison, or poorness, okay? And he goes forth to be king, even though he was born poor. His wisdom, if he exercises it, will elevate him. Okay? I mean, we've all heard the stories of the rags to riches. Everybody thinks, oh, that's just a great story and everything, but guess what the scripture is saying? You know, I have an idea that most people who wrote fantastic literature in years past never could have written it if they hadn't plagiarized the scripture. Because they didn't have an original idea. But the king will fall, not knowing how to be warned of traps. I mean, somebody that comes out of poorness, out of prison, you know, and goes up that way, he's learning, following where the traps are, you know, and he's growing. But somebody that never had that opportunity never learned where the traps are. You might look at verse 13 and 14. Verse 13, better is a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who will be admonished no more. Adam, first man, first Adam, was created fantastic. Eternal life, everything given to him, the whole thing. But he had no knowledge of the world, okay? Second Adam, Messiah, came what? And he came up and learned. And he learned through the things that he suffered, okay? And he's going to become the wise king. See how these two pictures then picture the first and the second Adam. Messiah and Adam. Verse 15, it says, I saw all the living who walk under the sun. They were with the second youth who stands in his place. There's no end of all the people over whom he was made king. You reckon this is talking about Messiah? I think it. Yet those who come after will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and grasping for the wind. He came to be king over all, and yet they refused him, and a lot of people never saw it. And they're still not seeing it. In chapter 5, he says, walk prudently when you go to the house of El, and draw near to hear, rather than to give the sacrifice of foods, for they do not know that they do evil. What he's saying is here, when you go to the house of El, where he is, you go to hear his word, rather than speaking your own words. Because they don't know that they're giving the sacrifice of foods. People talking, you know. Word going forth, and they're talking. They're more interested in what they have to say to one another than the word of Yahweh that's coming forth. And here he said one brother is a fool. Verse 2, do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before Elohim. For El is in heaven, and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. In that verse 1 there, chapter 5, talking about walking prudently, go to Exodus chapter 3. And in verse 5. Moses had seen the bush burning, and he went up to see what it was. Then he said, do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. See that verse over there, he said, walk prudently when you go to the house of El, and draw near to hear, rather than to give the sacrifice of food. When Moses drew near the bush, did he draw near to teach the bush, you know, how it's supposed to be burned up, or did he draw near to the bush to learn what was going on, to hear? He drew near to hear, to learn, to understand. He didn't draw near to give advice. And then in verse 2, when they talk about don't be rash with your mouth, let not your heart utter anything hasty before Elohim, go to Proverbs chapter 20. Verse 25. It's a snare for a man to devote rashly something set apart, or it's a snare for a man to devote something and say, okay, this is set apart, I'm going to give it to Yahweh. And then afterward to reconsider his vows. Okay?
Like that.
We have a real good representative. Yeah, go to Acts chapter 5. Huh?
Acts 5.
Yeah, Acts chapter 5. In verse 1. I mean, when we understand what this is, I think a lot of people never really understood this passage in Acts. But he said, but a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira his wife sold a possession. And he kept back of the proceeds, his wife also being aware, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. Now, back over in verse 32 of chapter 4, it said, now the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and one soul, neither did anyone say that anything he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. Okay? it goes on through, and it's talking about these, who went and sold things, and then they brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. Now, what they had done, they were saying, okay, I'm going to sell what I've got, and I'm going to get it into the pot to go to feed all the people, whatever, okay? But here he comes up here, verse 2, and he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware, and bought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. Verse 3, but Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the price of the land for yourself? It's worth, $10,000. And in his heart he said, okay, I'm going to give all of it. But then when he started to do it, he decided, maybe I better tell him I didn't get but 8,000. Well, here's the 8,000. Well, now wait a minute. Why did you have to? He's saying, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the price of the land for yourself? While it remained, was it not your own? I mean, if you're going to sell it for 10,000, you say, well, I'm going to give you 5. No problem, right? The only reason that you do something devious is because you're trying to make yourself out to be something you're not. While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to Elohim. I mean, the people may not have known what he was doing, but Yahweh did. Now, he was what? He was going to sell this, and then he had committed or set apart the proceeds from the sale to go to the people of Yahweh, right? And he said, when you've done it to the least of these my people, you did it to me. He said, you didn't lie to the people, but you lied to him. And what happened to him? He died real quick. And then his wife came in later, and guess what? She's part of the plot. And she died too. Yeah. Go back to Ecclesiastes. That verse 3, for a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. Go to Proverbs 10, and in verse 19, he says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. In the multitude of words. Some people just can't keep their mouth shut and listen. They're so busy talking they can't hear. Have you ever noticed in certain conversations with people not listening to you, the only thing they're doing while you're talking is they're trying to figure out what they're going to say next. They don't have any idea what you said. I mean, you ever been there? Have we ever been on the bad side of that conversation? I wasn't listening because I'm figuring what I'm fixing to say. Okay? And I know sometimes we do that, especially when we're trying to witness to people and we're not really listening to what their objection is. We're always figuring out some way to come back at them or something. And yet sometimes we ever listen to what they're saying and find out what their objection is and then go in and attack that objection, not something that we thought. Because most of the time they're not thinking like you think anyway. But we never know exactly what they're thinking until we listen close enough to hear what they say. You ever know sometime when you told somebody something or you taught somebody something, somebody come back and said, why did you say so and so? I didn't say that. Well, that's what I heard. The only reason you heard that is because you were talking so loud you couldn't hear me. We've been there on both sides of that coin, okay? And if we've been there, we need to learn from it. Anyhow, go back. But he said, a fool's voice is known by his many words. And then in verse 4, when you make a vow to Elohim, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. It is better not to vow than to vow and not pay. That's exactly what happened. Ananias and Sapphira over there. They made a vow, but then they didn't keep their vow. Verse 6, he said, do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of Elohim that it was an error. Why should Elohim be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? I mean, if we begin to realize what we're doing when we're doing these things, we're actually causing destruction to come upon ourselves. And we did it with our mouth. And of course, out of the heart The mouth speaks is what we're told in other places in the Scriptures. Verse 7, for in the multitude of dreams and many words is also vanity. But fear Elohim. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of Yahweh, right? In verse 8, if you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness in a province, do not marvel at the matter, for high official watches over high official, and higher officials are over them. Moreover, the profit of the land is for all. The king himself is served from the field. I mean, we got a president in the United States, right? And yet whatever he eats comes out of the field some farmer grew, is growing, whatever the... And yet it's the same thing we eat. They ain't no different. Verse 10, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. Doesn't matter how much you get, it ain't going to be enough. You're going to try to find ways to get more. Sometimes all we're doing is trying to get more so I can say, well, I got more than you. So what? What have you got? Verse 11, when goods increase, they increase who eat them. I found that out. The more money we made, the more we spent. The less money I made, the less we spent. The less money I made, the less we owe. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? I mean, when I was working so hard, and we're getting paychecks and everything, we used to call payday the day the eagle flies, right? Right from them to somebody else, just right by, Yeah. And it really does, you do it. And the more you make, the more bills you got, and the more stuff you want, the more you got to have. And for some reason or other, you got to have it because if I get this, it's going to make me happy. Well, didn't you say that about the last thing you got? It didn't make you happy. Why is this going to? Verse 12. The sleeper of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. He lying there trying to figure out how to keep him losing it all. Verse 13, there is a severe evil I have seen under the sun. Riches kept for their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune or bad business dealings. When he begets a son, nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil, just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? If everything you're laboring for has something to do with this earth, it's going to go away. It's like the wind. The only thing that's eternal is what? The knowledge of Yahweh and His Son. That's the only thing that's eternal. You want eternal life? What do you got to do? Get knowledge of Him and His Son. John 17 says this is eternal life, to know the Father and the Son whom He has sent. There's nothing else. The hardest part of all of us is trying to turn our attention away from the world out there and forget that stuff and just use it, to get through this, physical life and realize the important thing is to learn who the Father and the Son are, because that's where it's all going to be. Verse 17, all his days he also eats in darkness. He has much sorrow and sickness and anger. Here is what I have seen. It's good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which Elohim gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom Elohim has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of El. For every man whom El has given riches and wealth, and then given him the ability to eat of it, that is the gift of Elohim. That's a marvelous thing. A lot of people out there have gained wealth and riches, but never could really enjoy any of it. Verse 20, for he will not... I can't read those two words. What is that in verse 20?
Dwell, do he?
For he will not dwell on the earth all the days of his life, because Elohim keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. Actually, in the Hebrew that says, for he will not much remember the days of his life, because El keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. you don't really, keep thinking and remembering, and dwelling on all the things that's going on out there. Because if you're walking in righteousness, walking upright to Yahweh's Word, He's going to keep you busy doing what He said do, and you ain't got time to worry about what's going on in the world. That's really what this is saying. Chapter 6, he said, "There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. A man to whom Elohim has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires. Yet Elohim does not give him power to eat of it, but a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and it is a evil affliction or evil disease. If a man begets 100 children, is implied, and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say a stillborn child is better than he. For it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and its name is covered with darkness. Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, it has more rest than that man. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice over, but has not seen goodness." He said, "Do not all go to one place, all go to death," okay? The man who has no rest in his whole life is no better off than the child who never saw anything, was born and died and went away. In fact, he has more rest than that man did. Verse 7, "All the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the soul is not satisfied. For what more has the wise than the fool? What does the poor man have who knows how to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire," or the wandering of the nefesh. That number is 53:15. It's a word translated soul in so many places. Here they use the word desire. So he's saying, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the soul. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. That word whatever in verse 10 really is the Hebrew word ma. It means what. What one is, he has been named already. For it is known that he is man, and he cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. Since there are many things that increase vanity, how is man the better? Verse 12, "For who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun?" It's the second time he's asked that question. Nobody can tell you what's going to happen after you're gone. Only Yahweh knows, And if you're in Him, that's the only way you can know what's going to happen afterwards. Chapter 7, "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth." He says a good name is better than precious ointment. What happens if somebody defames somebody else, or goes and spreads malicious gossip about somebody, or destroys that person's reputation? Haven't they really destroyed who they are? It's almost the same thing as killing them, right? What's the difference in adult people gossiping about somebody and children calling children names? One grows up into the other, does it not? I mean, if you get by with calling people names, then you can by with saying things about them all the time. Those little things, in my mind anyway, these things are very close and they're tied to one another, but we have a real tough time seeing them. Maybe because we're always so close to the situation. But he said a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Because sometimes one being born into what? Think about this. You have a state, a nation of people over in the Middle East called the Palestinians. Those children being born and being raised up for what? Destruction. They're being taught to hate. They're being made enemies of Yahweh. And they're being raised up to be destroyed. Okay? So he said the day of death and the day of one's birth. When they die, they're, not only are they better off, but we are too. Everybody else that they were trying to kill is going to be better off. It's hard to see that. It's hard to think of it. It's hard to think of the death of a child as being something good. And why did Yahweh tell them to go in there and kill every man, woman, child, everything that breathes, everything? Because they have been totally corrupted, and if they're left alive, they're going to wind up corrupting His children. Now, is that because he's mean or because he loves his children? It's hard to see it. Verse 2, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men. The living will take it to heart. Those of you truly living will understand and know what he said is true. Verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. Yehoshua learned obedience to the things that he suffered. When you come out the other end and Yahweh walks through it with you, you're better having come through that, for now you have grown in that. You never really realize how good something is until all you've ever had was the bad. You know, I mean, if you never had round steak, you don't know how good it is to eat T-bone. You know. Anyway. Verse 4, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. I mean, a song of fools is somebody saying, oh, everything's going to be all right, everything's great, you know. Bad stuff's not going to happen, everything's going to be good. And somebody else is saying, no, if you don't change your ways, you're going to hell. I mean, somebody is telling truth and somebody is not, okay? And there's a lot of people out there preaching everything's going to be fine. Yahweh, he's just a God of love. Oh, the Old Testament God, yeah, he was mean, but the New Testament God, he's a God of love. That Old Testament God, you know, he hated, you know, all those people that did sins and everything, you know. But the New Testament God, he loves all the people, you know, whether they sin or not. It doesn't matter. Has anybody been hearing these things? I mean, I've been getting emails. Somebody read our website, and they sent me an email and said, you know, and I don't read much of it as long as it takes to hit the delete button, you know. But it's out there. I got one, you know, a couple of days ago. Somebody had written our website, you know, and they sent me this email and they said, "Don't you realize that all of the New Testament scriptures are lies? Let's just discuss the genealogies." And I hit the button. You know, it's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. In verse 6, for like the crackling or the sound of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. Talking about, you know, if you throw thorns under a pot and building a fire and the fire cracks and pops and everything, you know, he said that's the sound of the fool. The laughter. Verse 7, surely oppression destroys a wise one's reason, and a bribe destroys the heart. The end of a thing is better than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. The end of a thing. If you start out to build something, you know, when you first start out, you wonder sometimes, I ain't never going to get this done. But then when you get it finished and you've got the completed thing there, you say, boy, how much greater this is than when I started. That's what he's talking about. We all can relate to that, can't we? The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Verse 9, do not hasten your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. How many people ever said, boy, it was better in the old days than it is now? But it's really not. If you stop and think about it. Because hopefully you're learning something that you didn't know back then. Wisdom is good with an inheritance and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense or a protective shade, as money is a defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. And if you ain't got no wisdom, you ain't got life. Verse 13, consider the work of Elohim, for who can make straight what he's made crooked? Who can change what he's done? Now, if Yahweh created everything, remember that witches and magic and all this kind of stuff that's in the world and all the different things of astrology, all these are man's attempts to control the things of Yahweh outside of him. That's It's what witches are and incantations and everything else. You're trying to control the things of nature outside of Him. Consider the work of Elohim, for who can make straight what He has made crooked? In the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. Surely Elohim has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find nothing alongside or after him. I have seen all things in my days of vanity. There is a just one who perishes in his righteousness. And there is a wicked who prolongs his life in his wickedness. Well, we've all seen that. We wonder, how come this, And then we see this one that, how old is that person? Oh, 944. Boy, they're just too mean to die. I mean, have we ever heard those things? We have, haven't we? We've heard those things. We may have said them. Verse 16, do not be overly righteous, nor be overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? That sounds strange, doesn't it, okay? But when you start trying to be, you're taking His word that says do this and you're righteous, and when you say, well, if I'm going to be righteous here, if I do XXX on top of that, then I'm going to be even more so. And the next thing you know, you're building and adding to His word. Verse 7, do not be overly wicked, nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? That's a strong statement, isn't it? It is good that you grasp this and also not remove your hand from the other, for he who fears Elohim will escape or come forth from all of them. Wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city, for there is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. If we realize we're all sinners, we ain't no better than anybody else. So we realize then we're all righteous because of the covering of the sin that Yahweh's done for us through Yehoshua. Verse 21, also do not take to heart everything people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. I mean, if somebody works for you, at some point in time they're going to say, well, I hate working for that jerk. Right? Not that you ever said it when you were working for somebody. Verse 22, for many times also your own heart has known that even you have cursed others. I wonder how Yahweh knew that. All this I have proved or tested by wisdom. I said I will be wise, but it was far from me. Well, we almost there. Again, verse 23, all this I have proved by wisdom. I said I will be wise, but it was far from me. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? I applied my heart to know, to search and seek out wisdom, and the reason of things is implied, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases Elohim shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. In Proverbs we have the stories where it talks about a young man. Don't be lured, by this deceitful woman, okay? Deceitful woman is what? Somebody who's been deceived, and then they try to draw you into their deception. It's exactly the same thing as Hava, Eve, was deceived by the serpent, and then she was deceived, and yet she drew Adam in. The world is deceived out there. And deception, makes a wicked mistress, is what we're really talking about. Don't be deceived by this thing, and it draws you into that. Verse 27, here's what I have found, saith the preacher. One thing to another to find out the reason which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. Truly this only I have found, that Elohim made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Now you can talk about, you can read this from a man who had how many wives?
300 wives, 1,000 concubines.
Yeah, something like that, okay? In his experience, he hadn't found a righteous one yet, okay? Now we all know that the scripture says that with all his wives and concubines it drew him away from Yahweh because it brought him into worshiping all those different gods and things that they had. And it caused his downfall. Chapter 8. Who is like a wise one, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the sternness of his face is changed. I counsel you, keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to Elohim. Do not be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. Where the word of the king is, there is power. Doesn't the book of Hebrews talk about the writing of Yahweh in the Torah as being the word of his power? So where the word of our king is in us, there is power. Thought about that? The more of this word you get in you, the more of his power you have in you. And when the word is his word coming out your mouth, it comes out with power. Where the word of the king is, there's power. And who may say to him, what are you doing? He who keeps his command will experience nothing harmful. And the wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment, because for every matter there is a time and judgment, though the misery of man is great upon him or increases greatly. For he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him when it will occur? He don't know what's going to happen, so he can't tell you when it's going to happen. No one has power over the Spirit to retain the Spirit, and no one has power in the day of death. There's no discharge in that war, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. All this I have seen and applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. Then I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This also is vanity. Because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Think about that today. Somebody breaks the law, how long is it before they ever get brought to trial? Years and years and years. They have no fear of the law or anything else or punishment because it's not going to happen. That's the same thing, though, as somebody telling a child, don't do that or I'm going to spank you. Now, don't do that, I'm going to spank you. And they never get around to the spanking part. They always just keep saying they're going to do it, but it never happens. After a while, they say it ain't going to happen. And that way, you know, the thieves and the robbers and the crooks and murderers are today. Verse 12, though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear Elohim, who fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which is a shadow, because he does not fear before Elohim. But just because man doesn't do what's right doesn't mean Yahweh won't. He will. Verse 14, there is a vanity which occurs on earth, that there are just men or ones to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked. Again, there are wicked to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. And I said, this also is vanity. There's another place he said that rains on the righteous and the wicked at the same time. If both of them own fields, then the crops are going to grow. Okay? We can't always worry about what happens to them. The only thing we have to be concerned about is what happens to us and our walk with him, because what we're looking forward to is the end city, not the one we're in right now. Verse 15, so I commended enjoyment, because a man is nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry. For this will remain with him in his labor for the days of his life, which Elohim gives him under the sun. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night, then I saw all the work of Elohim, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover, yet he will not find. Moreover, though he's wise, attempts to know, he will not be able to find it. The things of Yahweh, those things secret, the things that he wants you to know, he's told you in his word, and that's the only thing that you're going to find out about him. And yes, somebody goes, have you ever heard anybody say, well, I have this, private revelation from Yahweh. It's not written in the scripture, but he's given me this revelation. Do y'all remember a man that was in the paper years ago by the name of Jim Jones? And he went down and established a community down in Guyana or someplace like that, you know. And all the people thought him wound up dead later on. But he had this private revelation from God. You know. Has anybody ever heard anybody say something? Well, I got a revelation, you know, it's not in the scriptures. Huh?
Run.
Yeah. Chapter 9. For I considered, or I put all this in my heart so that I could declare it all, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of Elohim. People know neither love nor hatred by anything that's before them. You don't know anything by basing everything on what you see out there. You have to learn based on what His Word says, and this gives you the true wisdom. Verse 2, everything occurs alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath is he who fears an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that one happens to all. Truly the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But for him who is joined to all the living there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. I don't care how strong he is, if he's dead, he ain't doing nothing. But a living dog can always grow up or learn or do something. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward. For the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love, their hatred, and their envy have now perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. Isn't that also saying that what do the living have to do seeking the dead for answers? And yet so many times people will say, oh, you know, Aunt Mary, who's been dead for 14 million years, she appeared to me the other night at the foot of my bed. I'm not saying these things don't happen, but what I'm saying to you is Yahweh says the living and the dead have no association. That wasn't Aunt Mary or whoever. It may have been an apparition that appeared, you know. But that's not what it's supposed to be. It wasn't Yahweh doing it, yeah. Verse 7, go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart. For Elohim has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil. Boy, that's a powerful verse 8. Your garments always be white. We're told that the whiteness, the righteousness, is the linen garments. The white garments of the saints is their righteous acts, right? And let your head lack no oil means the anointing of what? Yehoshua. The head is where you wear what? The helmet of salvation. That only comes from the anointed one. This afternoon we got talking about, I got some scriptures I want to show people. It talks about wearing something on your head. And Yahweh says, do it, you know. Kind of like the covering of your salvation and the helmet of salvation beside Yehoshua. We're going to talk a little bit in the scripture where it talks about those things. Verse 9, he said, live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun. All your days of vanity, for that is your portion in life, and in the labor which you perform under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do with your might. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. Have we ever realized that time and chance happens to everybody? And if you're out there in the world and this is all you're looking at, that's all it's going to be. Okay? But when we are diligently walking in obedience to Yahweh's word, then because the blessings are inherent in the obedience, then the good comes to those who walk in obedience to His word. He's saying this when you're out there trying to do all these things on your own. It ain't going to happen. Because out there in the world, using the way of the world is no, it's good, bad, it doesn't make any difference. Verse 12, for man also does not know his time. Like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare, so the sons of men are snared in an evil time when it falls suddenly upon them. This wisdom I have also seen under the sun, and it seemed great to me. Now he tells a story here in verse 14. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it, besieged it, and built great snares around it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that same poor man. Then I said, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. If he'd have been rich, people would have thought, oh, wow, that's great. But because he's poor, it doesn't matter. But yet, he saved the city, but then after it's all over, he's forgotten. Because he's not as good as us. Yeah, Jonah is one of them. Verse 17, words of the wise quietly heard, rather than the shout of a ruler of fools. Wisdom better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Kind of like one bad apple in the barrel. If you throw a good apple in a barrel of bad ones, does it turn all the others good? Not hardly. Chapter 10, dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment. And that's, he's saying, when you mix all these good things together and one dead fly gets in there and he's corrupted, it just causes the whole thing to go bad. And cause it to give off a foul odor. So a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. Even when a fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom, and he shows everyone he's a fool. If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your post, for conciliation pacifies great offenses. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, as an arrow proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, while the rich sit in a lowly place. I have seen servants on horses, while princes walk on the ground like servants. He who digs a pit will fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall will be bitten by a serpent. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits wood may be endangered by it. If the axe is dull and one does not sharpen the edge, then he must use more strength. Think about this simplest thing. If you're trying to chop wood with an axe, and he says if you sharpen it, you don't have to swing it so hard as you do if it's dull. Somebody once said you got to be smarter than what you're working with. Then he must use more strength, but wisdom brings success. A serpent may bite when it is not charmed. The babbler is no different. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. The words of his mouth begin with foolishness, and the end of his talk is raving madness. A fool also multiplies words. No man knows what is to be. Who can tell him what will be after him? Notice he's asked this question 2 or 3 times before. The labor of fools wearies them, for they do not even know how to go to the city. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child. When your king is driven by somebody who doesn't have anything but the lust of a child. We've seen that a whole lot here in the last few years, And your princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, O land, when your king is a son of nobles, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. You think about that one right there. If we celebrate one of his festivals, do you think that he's telling you to celebrate a festival to get drunk? Or he's telling you to celebrate a festival to draw strength from him? So how you do that determines on which one you get. Right? Verse 18, because of laziness, the building decays. And through idleness of hands, the house leaks. You keep a check on the roof, and fix it if it's bad, so it don't leak. Talking about the roof leaking, well, it only leaks when it rains. You don't have to worry about it when it's not raining, right? Verse 19, a feast is made for laughter and wine makes merry, but money answers everything. Money answers everything. Verse 20, do not curse the king even in your thought. Do not curse the rich even in your bedroom, for a bird of the air may carry your voice, and a bird in flight may tell the matter. He's saying you got to be very careful what you say, because somebody's going to hear something, and somebody's going to tell something, somebody that you said or something. It's going to happen. If you don't want somebody to hear what you say, don't say it. You know, what else? Can't be. Chapter 11, he says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Cast your bread upon the water. He's saying, you know, you give, you know, to people, and that's what the scripture says. You give. Book of Luke says, give and it'll be given back to you, you know, pressed down, shaken together, running over, right? When you give liberally. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty upon the earth. And if the tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall lie. Sounds kind of strange. But he's saying that what happened, happened. You're not going to change it. He who observes the wind will not sow. I don't know how many of you ever gone out to plant a field, but if you go out sometime, you come sow seed out there and the wind blowing like everything, you know, you ain't going to sow, right? He who regards the clouds will not reap. Oh my, if I go out there and reap this now and it's laying on the ground and it starts to rain, it's going to be ruined laying on the ground. Verse 5, as you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child. Do you know in all of our medical science today, nobody can tell you how the bones of the baby grow in the mother's womb? How did that happen? I mean, when it started out, it was just a spot, and then all of a sudden there's bones, and they don't know how. What holds our body together? I mean, when the spirit leaves it, the body decomposes and it all falls apart. So what holds it together? His word. You know, Peter says that the same word by which everything in this universe is held together right now is the same word that caused the destruction back in the time of Noah. People will say, well, that old word done away with. I hope not, because everything's fixing to fall apart if it is.
Turn back and look, huh?
So you do not know the works of Elohim who makes all. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening do not withhold your hand. For you do not know which will prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Truly the light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man lives many years, rejoicing in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. All that is coming is vanity. Rejoice, young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these, Elohim will bring you into judgment. Parents with children, knowing that everything that's done wrong, Yahweh is going to judge people for, when they're not teaching their children what they're supposed to be doing, then they're responsible for what happens to that child. Right? So you have to teach them as they're growing up, and they're, you know, you're going to be judged for everything you do. Everything you do wrong, you're going to pay for it. Verse 10, therefore remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. Chapter 12 says, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near, when you say, I have no pleasure in them. I mean, have y'all ever met or known somebody who worked, you know, all their life or something, you know, and then retired and then died?
Yeah.
What was it all for? Or maybe somebody who worked all life and then retired, and you go talk to them and they're just so unhappy, you know. Well, I don't have it. Well, you got money in the bank, yeah, but so what? I can't, you know. They're so sick they can't get around. I mean, yeah, I mean, Verse 2, he said, while the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the cloud do not return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim, When the doors are shut in the streets, the sound of grinding is low. When one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of music are brought low. Also, when they are afraid of height and of terrors in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper is a burden, and desire fails. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Verse 6, he's saying, it implied, remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed. Or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to Elohim who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. Verse 9, and moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright, words of truth. See, everything that you find written in the Psalms and the Proverbs and that Solomon wrote in the book of Ecclesiastes, he still says these are words of truth. Verse 11 said, the words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. Well-driven nails. Sometime when you're speaking to somebody, and all of a sudden you hit a nerve, yeah, and they don't like it.
Found in the little throat, huh?
Well, it's, the words, you're speaking, Verse 12, he says, and further, my son, be admonished by these. And of making many books there's no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. I mean, the flesh gets tired just sitting there listening to me for 3 hours, doesn't it? We're kind of reading, we're studying, but the flesh does, not necessarily the spirit. I'm not saying that, but the flesh gets tired. Verse 13. I guess these are two of my most favorite verses. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. That word whole there is the word kol. All things. The conclusion of all things.
Complete.
Fear Elohim and keep His commandments. For this is the whole. Now my Bible has the word duty in there, but the word duty is not in the text. The actual Hebrew text there only has words. For this is the whole of man. That word whole there means the entire being of who man is. For this is the whole of man. For Elohim will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it's good or whether it is evil. People growing up, everything that they've ever done wrong, everything that they've ever lied about is going to be brought to light. Okay? Sometimes it's a whole lot better now to speak it, get it over with, get forgiven for it, and go on about your business. Because one of these days, it's going to come to light at a time when you really don't want it to come out. Yeah, right? At the most inopportune time, right? Anyway, that concludes the reading of the book of Ecclesiastes. And I thank you for your attention, and that concludes the readings for this day.